So we'll welcome everybody that's signed on for QA review. I hope it's my first one that I've had in a while, so I've been a part, but the last one we did here at the Academy, so that's been a few years ago. So we do have Ryan with us, and he's ready to guide us through the QA review today. And he's wide awake and ready to go. Right, Ryan?
I'm ready. Let's do this.
All right, I'm gonna let you take it away.
All right. So while we're going through this today, Kyle and Corey will be monitoring the chat. I'm presenting. I can't see the chat. I can't know who's on the call. It's the thing with Teams. So those two gentlemen will be looking out for your questions. You can also post questions to the AHA slides if you're logged in there as we go along. But whatever your preference, we'll just periodically stop to see if there's anything in the chat or hands raised or things like that. So again, if you haven't gone over to AHA Slides and you'd like to participate, I do recommend it. Go over to the website or scan this QR code on a second device and you'll be able to join in on the interaction side. So I'll put this up again in a minute. Let's just sort of get this started a little bit. This is our semi-annual workshop for QA for the state of Maine. I've got some good topics for you today. Please make sure that if you do log on to the AHA Slides version, you choose a name and an avatar. You don't have to identify yourself. It can be completely anonymous. I'm not looking to score anybody or ding anybody or anything like that. This is supposed to be fun and interactive while we're going through a bunch of topics. So just keep that in mind. We're going to start that quiz question very shortly just to get everybody on the same page. All right, so let's just begin. Ryan Caiazzo, many of you know me as I had a big role in the EFD rollout in the state of Maine over the past few years. So I've been to, I think, every RCC and dispatch center in the state of Maine over the past few years, at least a couple of times. I am currently working with Priority Dispatch. For those of you who know me, I'm a contractor for Priority Dispatch. I don't directly work for them. I'm a regional implementer and work for Quality Performance Review, which is formerly National Queue. Many of you actually, I was your analyst for the National Queue for EFD. So I'm still around and still queuing tons and tons of calls every week and working with a ton of agencies to get the protocols up and running. So that's a little bit about me if you didn't know who I was. Today we're going to spend three different areas of focus. One of them is revisiting QA concepts. Some of that is just rehashing a little bit of things we went over in March. I have some new content in all areas, specifically chief complaint selection and clarification. That is an introduction to reasonableness in queue. What? Oh my God, reasonableness in queue? No, that's inconceivable. Yes, reasonableness is here. It's something that we need to set ourselves up for. And we're going to go through the entire process of what does it mean to be a reasonable queue in 2022. So we've got a lot of interesting stuff to share with you on that front. We are going to take a break about halfway through this. This is scheduled for 3 hours, so somewhere between 10:30 and 11 at a good opportunity. I will be watching the clock, or Corey or Kyle can let me know that you guys need a break, and we will take a break so that you can step away. You can step away at any point you need. This is recorded. Everyone has things to do and places to be, so no worries on that front. So let's start today with a quiz question, and hopefully I'm going to get a bunch of players on here. So go ahead and choose your avatar and your username if you're going to be doing that. I've got Santa, I've got Candy, Laura, Kyle or Corey, can you see my webcam?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I can see it.
I've got Michael with an owl, Rael. See if we can get a couple more on here. Oh, I got a goat. I like that. Monique. Good morning, Monique. I always love when there's familiar names on these calls, people I've worked with or corresponded with. Give it 10 more seconds and we are going to start. You want that QR code? I'll put it up one more time. All right, get ready for quiz question number 1 to jump things off today. Here we go, starting the quiz. The intent of Q is to do what? All right. So 7 out of 7 said coach, mentor, and explain, and I agree that is our intent. We don't want to use Q as a vehicle to criticize or ostracize or be punitive in any way. That is counterproductive and definitely is not going to make a healthy Q program at your dispatch center or RCC. So 7 out of 7, great start to the day. So there will be a leaderboard periodically that comes up that'll show kind of who's in the lead on some of these quiz questions. As you saw, there's going to be 13 questions this morning. You do earn more points for faster responses, and I have adjusted the times for how long it should take to complete a particular question, anywhere between 40 and 60 seconds. So after they time out, you'll just, if you haven't put an answer in, it'll just come up as not answered. All right. So go ahead and tell me which RCC or dispatch center you are from. Oh, why is that? There we go. All right, we got Sagadahoc, Lewiston Auburn, DPS Augusta, Saco PD, Cabot Cove. Little Murder, She Wrote reference there. All right. Let us move on. All right, go ahead and rate this statement. I love being a Q, always, most of the time, sometimes, or never. We got quite a few answers for most of the time. 5 seconds remaining. All right, so I'm glad to see we have at least one person who's always in that bucket for being a Q, 2 for sometimes and 3 for most of the time. Yeah, I think that's pretty normal to say most of the time people do love being a Q. Of course, there are some times where being a Q definitely has its drawbacks, and we'll actually talk a little bit about that this morning. So I'm glad to see that there were no nevers on that list, because that means that, you know, you haven't been sullied by bad experiences with Q, which can happen with a lot of experienced Qs. So, all right, tell me something that you like about Q. Got a lot of good answers so far. We've got getting to know the protocol, being able to help coach, mentoring and training, growth, coaching, feedback, continuous improvement. I see improving performance as well. Trainees getting feedback. All right. Yeah, these are some really good examples of things that I think everyone should like about Q, right? We're helping people to grow, we're mentoring them, we're coaching them through protocol, and we're also able to learn more protocol through QA. And in fact, I would say in my experience using protocol since 2002 till present, the number one thing that made me a better dispatcher was actually becoming a Q and then having to relearn all of the things I probably should have retained when taking EMD and EFD, right? But unfortunately, not everyone comes out of those classes and they're a rock star, and we forget things over time. So Q kind of helps us to balance that out. So really good examples here. I'm super glad to see these on the board. Now tell me what you like least about Q. All right, so we've got quite a diversity of answers here. Not wanting to use EFD or EMD, oh, that's nothing I've heard this week. Pushback, that's always a big one. Time, yes, Q is very time consuming. Tedious, Q is absolutely tedious. Delayed feedback, and that's an interesting one. Yep, that happens quite a bit, right? By the time you actually get to face-to-face feedback, it could be a week, 2 weeks, or more before you actually meet with that person. The call is pretty cold. Anger, repetitive. Yeah, Q can be pretty repetitive, especially in the feedback. We'll talk about that later. Never enough time to do it. Yeah, I agree with all of those things, right? There's just never enough time in the day to do Q as good as we want to do it. So we always have to work within constraints, right? It's no mystery that right now all dispatch centers in the world are critically understaffed and receiving more emergency calls than ever, right? And people are being forced to work overtime and mandatory and coming in on their days off and having to be mandated to stay late or come in early, right? And so because of that, a lot of Qs are actually back working on the floor doing either hybrid roles or just working the floor. And, you know, unfortunately, Q takes a back seat to operational staffing a lot of times. So I'm hearing that a lot over the past few months, especially this summer. It's been really crazy. All right. So let's just kind of go through a few things this morning as a refresher, right? We do want to remember why we Q, right? And we Q because we're looking to mentor and we're looking to measure performance. And again, we are not the only industry that's highly protocolized, right? We have a lot of different agencies out there. For example, healthcare, highly protocolized, public safety, highly protocolized, right? What we do is highly protocolized. Even fast food is highly protocolized, right? We last time that we met, we did a poll on what's the best quality of a fast food restaurant, and we had an interesting discussion about that, right? So they use lots of protocols. Aviation, lots of protocols, right? So we're just basically trying to make sure that we understand that we're not the only ones using a script and we're not the only ones who have to follow protocol, right? A ton of industries follow protocol. So quality assurance then is simply measuring our outputs versus a standard. You can't know what you don't measure. And that's our goal, right? Is to look at a case and say, what happened in this case? Is there a performance issue? Did we meet the expectation? Did we provide all of the items in protocol that are required? Do we have a performance standard that applies to a specific situation? So quality assurance is all about the measurement and the way of being able to gauge how well something was done versus that particular standard. And then we have quality improvement, right? And quality improvement is, okay, I know how the call went, but what do I have to do to make this better the next time? This is where that future forward feedback comes in that we started discussing back in March, right? It's strengths-based feedback, it's future forward feedback. I'm not worried about what happened in the past. The past is the past. We can't change it. Whether we had a good call, a bad call, a good outcome, or a bad outcome, quality improvement is all about, all right, the next time you get something similar to this, here's the expectation for you to provide the best service that represents, you know, what our community needs and expects from us as an RCC or dispatch center. And that's really the ticket, is meeting those expectations. So we're assuring quality, and now we're looking to improve quality. Question 2 of 13 for today. When staying on the line where the patient is not alert and incoming calls are queuing, meaning unanswered, the ED should do what? Got 6 out of 7 who have answered so far. Not alert patient, incoming calls going unanswered. What do we do? All right, so 6 out of the 6 who answered said use X4 for urgent disconnect, right? Of course, that's the answer. We know that we have to attempt to stay on the line with a not alert patient. That's not optional, but I see it optional every single week in QA. People don't stay on the line. Oh, we're too busy. Well, you need to make the attempt to stay on the line. If you become too busy, then use urgent disconnect. And that's a clean, appropriate way to terminate that call and to go on to the next call, or to answer the radio, or do any of the other things that you're doing when you can't afford to stay on the line with somebody who's simply not alert. So I'm glad to see that X4 was selected. Number 3 for today. So not staying on the line when the patient is not alert is an example of what type of deviation? 10 seconds. I got 6 out of 7 answered. All right, we had definitely a diversity of answers in here. 2 said it was a DLS link deviation, and that is the correct answer. 1 said a PDI deviation, and 1 said minimum standard of practice. So it's just a DLS link deviation, right? Which is critical, meaning that the call is going to be non-compliant for that one thing, no matter what else happens in the call. And of course, that's the rub, right? Is I could have a perfectly executed case, and then I don't attempt to stay on the line when required. That meets the threshold for non-compliant for one item, instead of having multiple smaller or moderate deviations add up to a low compliant or non-compliant. One thing is enough to put it over the edge. Minimum standard of practice would not apply to failing to stay on the line. That's a much higher standard. We're actually going to talk a little bit about minimum standard of practice in a minute. And finally, PDI deviation is not the answer, because it doesn't involve PDIs. It actually just involves a dispatch life support link, which is stay on the line. And some of you have noticed that a software update that came out last winter now puts the cursor priority, or what we call the green arrow, on not alert when protocol in medical identifies the patient is not alert. And so even though they did that, we're still seeing a ton of call takers and dispatchers nationwide override that cursor priority and go to stable routine disconnect for a not alert patient. And that's a pretty significant issue. So if that's something that's happening at your center, that's a discussion with operations, your leadership, and it's also a discussion among your queue group to make sure that you're putting out information about following cursor priority for your not alert patients, especially on sick person, where we see it the most. 26 Delta 1, sick person not alert. You have to attempt to stay on the line with that caller until either you can no longer, which would be X4 urgent disconnect, or responder arrival. It's not optional. And there's a lot of misinformation out there, amazingly, about that situation. So not alerts, not negotiable in that regard. Let's see who's on our leaderboard. right, we've got Monique in the lead with 263 points. Good job, Monique. Right, so I would like you to tell me what an example of an unstable patient is. What kind of patient is that? All right, we got some great answers here. Everyone has at least put one in. I've got unconscious. That's a great example. Difficulty breathing, worsening chest pain, not alert, and delta. Yep, so all of those are examples of potentially unstable patients. They don't fall into clear categories for the most part. I couldn't say that every difficulty breathing or every chest pain is an unstable patient. But when there's doubt, we always want the dispatcher to stay on the line with that caller to monitor their condition. And so many of you have heard me say this before, that when in doubt about staying on the line, a Delta patient should likely be stay on the line, right? Especially if they're alone, especially if their condition is worsening, such as worsening chest pain that somebody put in, or even worsening difficulty breathing, right? At the Charlie level, and we can have a difficulty breathing or a chest pain at a Charlie level. We could even have an alpha level chest pain if a patient is under 35 years and is otherwise asymptomatic. We do give benefit of the doubt to the dispatcher unless your agency has a policy about that being a stay on the line mandatory situation. And some places do have policies that list every single code or situation where the dispatcher is required to attempt to stay on the line. And if you notice, I am always prefacing my comments with attempt to stay on the line. And I think we really need to focus on that word, because I can't definitively say, and neither can you, that we're absolutely going to stay on the line until somebody gets there in every single case, right? You can have a major incident impacting your center, or just be have a really busy shift, and you can't afford to be tied up on a difficulty breathing or a chest pain, perhaps if somebody's with the patient and can monitor that patient. So every situation can be a little bit different. And sometimes the caller party does make the difference, right, of staying on the line versus not staying on the line. Take our chest pain or our difficulty breathing, right? Those are situations where if the patient is alone, that heightens my awareness of staying on the line. But if they're there with family who can easily redial 911 and I don't have the luxury of staying on the line, then I certainly, I would probably use an urgent disconnect with that, even though I would want to stay on the line because there's somebody there with the patient. So a lot of these things are situational. And when we talk a little bit later this morning about reasonableness, what this is going to come down to is you as the queue making an informed decision that's reasonable, right? Is what the dispatcher did something I would do or that I would have considered if I were in their shoes answering this call? And I think that's really a place that a lot of us need to be mindful of putting ourselves in when we do these case reviews. There are black and white queues, there are gray queues, and there's a spectrum. And it depends on where you fall on that spectrum as to what your view is on this. There are only a few things that in protocol are mandatory for stay on the line, right? And an example of that might be a suicidal patient, a not alert patient, an unconscious patient, anything involving pre-arrival instructions. Outside of that sort of bucket, agencies are free to determine what other codes or situations would be stay on the line for their agency. The Academy doesn't really get involved too much in those other areas. So here are some examples of criteria for using stay on the line, right? The patient has one or more priority symptoms like chest pain, breathing problem, serious hemorrhage, or decreased level of consciousness. That can be even a 26 Charlie 1, sick person altered level for some agencies. Or the patient is not alert, example 26 Delta 1. And then other situational examples, suicidal, as we mentioned, elderly alone, and even a child caller. right? If you look in ProQA, and no one ever really does this, so I'll point it out to you, and you go to your case exit card and you click on the special information tab at the bottom, which is right above the DLS links, you'll see examples of stay on the line that are in the protocol as well. So whenever possible, when you're giving feedback, try to use ProQA as an educational piece for your dispatchers. Show them where things are, because I guarantee you most of your dispatchers have either never clicked on special information or it's been so long they forgot that it's there, right? Same thing with additional information tab. People don't look at that information nearly as enough as they should, but Q gives us the ability in hindsight to go back and show them through a case reconstruction where this information was available, right? We're not expecting them to do this in live time on every call and be like, oh, let me consult my big long list. No one's saying that. We're just saying when you give the feedback, say, hey, remember child caller is actually on that list. Consider staying on the line with that situation, right? So DLS care, of course, right? Airway, breathing, childbirth, choking, all those things we would stay on line because we're delivering scripted medical protocol or pre-arrival instructions to that particular caller. So the one standout on here is going to be that not alert situation. And as we've mentioned, that the caller party can help us with that decision as well. Remember that just because a caller is a third or fourth party, that doesn't mean that they don't get post-dispatch instructions or pre-arrival instructions, right? If that third or fourth party caller can reasonably relay that information to the patient or somebody with the patient, like a security guard or an alarm monitoring company that has two-way voice with somebody, then that changes the dynamic of this. So we don't want to just say, oh, because they're third or fourth party, we would never even go through this. That's not necessarily the case, right? You don't know, with all the technology we have now and people communicating through VoIP and Facebook apps and all these other social media apps, they may actually have a way to communicate basic instructions. Last March, I gave a couple of examples from FHIR protocol of issues where the telecommunicator was able to relay through one of those services instructions on how to keep the caller safe, and that was done and it helped, right? So you don't know what's going to be happening with a lot of those. We're going to do question 4, and I'm going to pause for any feedback. A dispatcher uses sick person for a patient complaining of numbness in her arm. Is that correct or incorrect, Chief Complaint? All right, so one person said that was correct and 5 said it was incorrect. Well, sure, it's incorrect, right? We would not use sick person for a patient complaining of numbness in her arm because that's a hidden heart attack symptom, right? That could also be considered a stroke symptom. And so the question becomes, are we, when we have this situation happen, going into protocol and showing our dispatchers, hey, remember that when you go to protocol 10 and you click on the additional information tab, all of our what we call hidden heart attack symptoms are listed in the AI panel. I don't expect people to have this list memorized every day that they come into work, right? I've seen some centers actually print off a little thing and tape it to every monitor to get better compliance on hidden heart attack symptoms, right? This is where the caller doesn't know that it's a possible heart attack. Then they're not describing it with the words chest pain. What they're describing is a sign or a symptom that we as the trained emergency medical dispatcher have to recognize, right? And so you see in this list, numbness is on there, right? Pressure's on there, tightness is on there. And look at what the protocol says. While these symptoms are most common in the chest, they may also or only be present in the arms, jaw, neck, or upper back. And these should be considered equivalent to chest pain and handled on protocol 10, right? And so this is an all-inclusive list. And just like for ineffective breathing, there can be reasonable equivalents on there. We'll talk about reasonableness again later, but remember that when we give feedback or whomever's giving feedback, taking somebody back into the software and showing them where to find this information is connecting the dots. And all of us need to get a little bit better at that show and tell portion so that when we're giving the incident performance report written feedback, they're making sense onto, oh, okay, now I do see it there. Yeah, I don't normally look there. I'll be a little bit more careful next time of that information. Or maybe you have this dialogue, right, which is even more valuable, and say, well, I might consider heart attack symptoms, but I actually was leaning more towards stroke, right? And then have that discussion. Well, yes, tingling and numbness could also be a stroke symptom. So we're not saying definitively that you must go to protocol 10. You can have other considerations to other chief complaints, right? Especially when there's an AI conflict, additional information conflict, or a rules conflict, right? Very few callers actually, for example, say the word stroke when what they're describing are symptoms of a stroke that they don't recognize, but that we as dispatchers and queues need to be on the lookout for. And so that's a little bit about taking them in and sort of making sure we're showing them. I do want to pause here for any feedback or questions from the group this morning. All right, question 5 of 13 for today. A patient states her mom got dizzy, then fell. Which chief complaint? Looking for 2 more answers on this. All right, time's up. The answer is protocol 31, unconscious fainting and near fainting, right? Remember, dizziness that precedes a fall, which is ground level, is handled on protocol 31. You want to take your dispatchers back into protocol 31, go to the AI panel and show them where the rule is that a ground level fall that was preceded by dizziness is a medical event. It is handled on protocol 31. And that's precisely why there's a key question on protocol 17, which asks what caused the fall, right? We're looking for the caller to say that somebody got dizzy or they got electrocuted, and that's a shunting question, right? So putting things together for your dispatchers in quality assurance is really the meat of what we do. It's being able to connect those dots in a meaningful way and showing them where the information is that's available. I could go to protocol 17 on this, but I'm going to get shunted to 31 anyway. And now I've got a deviation for choosing the wrong chief complaint, because we should expect seasoned dispatchers know that dizziness before a fall or near fainting before a fall is handled on protocol 31, right? It's the question of what came first, the chicken or the egg. And again, the caveat is it has to be a ground level fall. That's actually a medical event, not a trauma event. So this is I put this question in here because this is still a big thing for a lot of agencies that are like, well, I think it's more of a trauma. Well, we have a rule about it for a reason. We don't want to miss medical arrest. If we go to protocol 17 and treat it as trauma, we're potentially missing a medical arrest, and we're handling something on trauma that doesn't necessarily need to be on trauma. It needs to be screened on protocol 31 so that we can get to the root of the problem. Remember, age and gender can have an impact on protocol 31, right? For males and females, we're looking for different things. And so that fainting or near fainting or dizziness before they fell is very useful for protocol to classify the call and prioritize the call, right? We get a question in there for females about abdominal pain on protocol 31 of a specific age range. That's by design, as we're trying to look for things like ectopic pregnancy. In males, we're trying to look for things like AAAs, acute aortic aneurysm, right, on different protocols. And that's why those questions are built in there. And that's why age and gender on case entry is super important for us. Number 6, caller reports a smell of rotten eggs in her basement. Which chief complaint? Got 5 out of 7. Let this one time out. Sometimes I need to make the questions time out a little bit quicker, because if somebody abandons the app, it'll just wait for them and for a long time. All right, 5 seconds. All right, so 4 said gas leak and 2 said odor, and survey says it is a gas leak, right? We actually have a rule about that in chief complaint selection in EFD. That is a very unique smell, and that rule tells us we want to go to protocol 60 for gas leak and not for odor. Although, yes, there is a shunt built in from odor to gas leak for this very reason, that some dispatchers don't remember their chief complaint selection rules, right? And we want to remind them there are certain things that come up quite often enough that we should remember them, that the rotten eggs is definitely going to be a gas leak. But if they don't remember, take them in and show them where the rule is so that they become familiar with it. Which can also happen. People are like, no, I want to stay on odor, and they will ignore the shunt. And that's definitely a bigger issue than the initial chief complaint issue is. Number 7, caller says, Dad says he just lost vision in his right eye. Which chief complaint? Ten seconds. All right, 1 for eye problem and 4 for stroke. Yep, definitely suspected stroke. So we want to go to protocol 28, take your dispatcher in and show them the additional information tab on protocol 28, where it talks about sudden changes in vision or eye problems are actually handled on protocol 28. So you see, last March, we spent a lot of time on things like freelances and inappropriate clarifiers. This session, we're focusing a lot on chief complaint, because we want to increase the compliance to chief complaint as best we can. Let's see who's on our leaderboard. We've got Monique in number 1, followed by Laura and Goat in 2 and 3. All right, good job everyone so far. Santa and Michael towards the bottom. So I've been talking a lot about showing them the additional information, and I'm really big on this because like many learners, I'm a very visual and hands-on learner. I need to see it, and I need to actually navigate and click on it myself in order for me to really learn that particular information. Some people are auditory learners, and everyone has a different learning style. But at least taking them in and showing them that where these rules are, specifically like Rule 6 about the chief complaint being medical in nature, choosing that chief complaint that best fits the patient's foremost symptom with consideration given to priority symptoms. We talked a lot about that last March in the context of chest pain, right? And we talked about how a chest pain does not necessarily need to go on protocol 10, right? If that chest pain was traumatic in nature, or something like that, we're not strong arming the dispatcher into protocol 10 for something like we used to when we had to give precedence to priority symptoms. Now we're giving consideration to priority symptoms, which makes it a little less objective as cues, right? And that's also the rub, is we have to be the one to provide the feedback and to make the assessment as to whether or not a particular dispatcher followed a rule or applied a rule or a performance standard properly to a particular case. And that is not always a black and white situation. And that's why we're going to need to be a little bit more reasonable in our approach. So Obviously, every chief complaint has its own selection rules as well, but these are the main ones, right? So anytime that you can do a quiz with your group on these or put these out as reminders that to click on them and to review them is always a win for you as a queue, because you're going to get better compliance overall by reintroducing some of these items here. One of the ones on here that I will, before we move on, that is a big one still, is number 8, right? When the complaint description suggests a generalized seizure, go to protocol 12 regardless of consciousness and breathing status. Many of you have probably reviewed calls where the dispatcher went to cardiac arrest and we did CPR potentially unnecessarily on a patient because rule number 8 was ignored, right? We want to go to protocol 8 if it's a seizure, regardless of the breathing status. Think about this. It's impossible to assess breathing in a seizing patient. But we also know that once the seizure stops, there's also a likelihood that the patient may or may not be breathing effectively. So that's why the breathing verification tool is a mandatory pop-up tool in the sequence on protocol 12. We know that's an issue. We want to get to that tool in the proper order, and that's why we're saying we go to protocol 8, right? So again, I'm harping on this. Anytime you can take them in and remind them, here's the rule, and here's why the rule is in there. We know it's impossible for the caller to really give us an accurate description of the breathing in a patient who's convulsing. So protocol 8 does a really good job of getting not only the history, but the present status of the seizure, whether it's the shaking has stopped or not, and then an assessment of the breathing. And then if necessary, a link into DLS instructions for CPR in the event that that patient comes out of the seizure and stops breathing, which can definitely happen. I'm sure many of you have taken calls where that's happened, right? But I don't want to jump the gun and go right to hands on chest for a run-of-the-mill seizure, but we see a ton of that happen even among what we call seasoned EMDs who've been using protocol for 5, 10, 15 years or even longer. It's just one of those things that people kind of lose sight in the moment. And yeah, it's going to come down to clarifying the chief complaint, which we're going to get to in a little bit in some cases, but generally speaking, seizure, especially a generalized seizure, we are going to go to protocol 12. All right, here's your opportunity to give a little feedback. Your dispatcher incorrectly chooses sick person for every other medical call. What coaching will you provide? All right, we're getting some good responses in here. Let's start taking a look. I've got one, provide them with practice scenarios and then go over each one as to why the chief complaint is a better option. Oh, I like that one. Got another one in here, use the rules. Yep, definitely want to use our chief complaint selection rules. Have them do test cases in ProQA. Yep. Try to understand the chief complaint. Are there any priority symptoms? The more accurate we can be, the better service we can provide. Oh, I really like that because it gives a reason along with the requested action, and that's always a win for us. A one-on-one meeting to find out if there is something I can do to help with the chief complaint selection. Yeah, that's really good too, right? So we're just trying to get down to that level and figure out, like, why are you using sick person? Many of you, including myself, we like sick person. It's a predictable, easy chief complaint. We know all the questions verbatim, we know what order they're in, we know what's going to happen if with the shunts because we use it so much. But if everybody goes in as a sick person, then what really is a sick person, right? So we're seeing a ton of stuff in sick person that doesn't belong there. Abdominal pain, non-traumatic back pain, chest pain, near fainting, all of those things. We have chief complaints that handle that situation, right? The number one thing in my experience as a Q that I always found curious was when a call taker or dispatcher would say, well, these questions don't make any sense. I don't like protocol because the questions are stupid. And then we look at what happened with the chief complaint selection, and I'm like, well, you know what? I would agree with you that the questions are stupid because you went to sick person for this and the questions don't match up, or whatever chief complaint that they went to. We have a chief complaint selection rules issue. And finally, we had somebody say, sit down with the dispatcher to go over rules of case entry, talk about protocol choice. Flashcards, I love flashcards. The importance of reviewing a protocol a day. That's a really good habit. If you can swing that and have everyone review a specific protocol each day or each week, that's huge. Even for basic things like just mentioned non-traumatic back pain. We keep forgetting that back pain is there, right? So, or abdominal pain. It's great to sort of brush up on those particular rules. All right, let's see, we can vote on some of the best answers on this, but I think I'll just sort of fast forward through. All right, question 8 of 13 on this one. A caller reports that he's inside a home that is filling with smoke. The emergency dispatcher does not tell her to get out. This is an example of what? He or her, I see that it's incongruent. I guess today it doesn't matter. So smoke in the home, we don't tell him to get out. All right, survey says the correct answer is minimum standard of practice deviation, although 6 said DLS link deviation. So let's think about this for a second. It could be a DLS link deviation if I don't provide scripted post-dispatch instructions in that structure fire scenario. But let's say that this happens at case entry, right? Or this happens before I know a lot of information about it, right? We know that there's an instruction to basically get out and stay out. And if you're on the newest version of EFD, we actually have a follow-up question. Once we tell them to leave the building, close the doors behind them, take others with them, we then follow up and we say, I need to confirm, is everybody out of the building, right? So if you're not on that version of EFD, you need to talk to your leadership about updating. We have some nice new things in both protocols that have come out this year, and that includes that situation. So this actually would be a minimum standard of practice for a couple of reasons, right? If you think about this as a queue, we have Universal Standard 21, which talks about when we suspend protocol to give safety instructions as one reason. Anytime a caller is in imminent danger, and we have a mechanism in protocol, we need to use it, right? Even if it's just a common sense one that's in the back of your head. We know that basically get out and stay out is in the protocol. We should be stopping at that very moment and telling them to get out, close the door behind them and not go back into the building, right? And so we don't need to have it in front of us on the screen at that particular time, right? You would not want to tell your dispatcher, well, you have to wait until that instruction comes up in the sequence because we have to follow the script. Priority dispatch says so. No, actually, we don't say so. Life doesn't happen according to a script. Universal Standard 21 is dispositive. It says you will suspend protocol to provide a safety instruction to the protocol to the caller in a situation. Not doing so doesn't meet our minimum standard of practice, right? This is a similar example to the one where you're in case entry and on a medical call, on a seizure, we'll pick on that one because we just talked about that. And you hear the caller telling somebody in the background to quick get a spoon and put it in her mouth so she doesn't swallow her tongue. And you know that that is a huge no-no in protocol. We have a scripted instruction for that, but you're not there yet. You're in case entry, right? You're only at, are you with the patient now? You have a whole 30 to 60 seconds before you're ever going to get to that post-dispatch instruction, right? The expectation is you suspend protocol and you basically tell them not to do that, right? You don't have to have it verbatim. You don't have to have it as scripted necessarily. If you want to, you could go to the target tool and you could grab the seizure PDIs from the target tool, right? That's why the target tool is on the toolbar. It's accessible at any point in the protocol. And the seizure PDIs are in the target tool on the top right. So if you haven't trained your staff about use of the target tool, now is a good time to take this back to your agency and show them. If you want to follow the exact script to the T, that's great. Go ahead and click on that, click on the seizure PDIs, and you'll now give them the 3 scripted post-dispatch instructions, even in case entry. We allow you to do that because, again, life doesn't go to the script. There is a lot of flexibility that's built into ProQA. People just don't use it, right? And then as queues, and the whole reason we have these semi-annual meetings is we have to start looking at how we're managing that situation on our end. Are we quote unquote dinging them for that? Are we marking that as a freelance instruction? Are we marking that as an instruction or question in an inappropriate area? Are we following the intent of protocol 21 for suspending protocol, right? Those are all variables that we as the queue have to manage and provide meaningful feedback. If you mark that and say, well, you shouldn't have given the caller that instruction, it wasn't on your screen. Well, you're undoing the intent of protocol. The minimum standard of practice is that first, we don't create additional victims at the scene, and second, we do no harm. And so we have to remember that those are our pillars of protocol. Once we get those 2 things down, then protocol is great to review, right? We can provide as much feedback as we want in those situations. So because of the situation where these calls are dynamic, we've got to be a little bit more flexible in what the ED says. So the concern on this question, though, is the ED stays silent on it. And I put this up here because this is a real world example of an agency that I worked with not too long ago, where when the queue gave feedback, the dispatcher literally said, nope, you ding me every time that I do something out of order. So guess what? I knew I should have said it. I intentionally didn't say it because it was not on my screen. Well, folks, to have that dialogue between a dispatcher and his queue means that our system is broken or their system is broken. But I know from experience this of attitude. An unintentional consequence of quality assurance and providing feedback is the behavior that I just described and the attitude of that dispatcher. And that's very disheartening to somebody like me and to many of you on this call, where that's not the intent of Q, right? The intent is to educate, inform, engage. That. I do want to pause here for any feedback on this one, because this usually generates a lot of discussion.
So Rael Atkins has her hand up.
Rael, go for it.
Yeah, I just was wondering, is this a new change? Because obviously I wasn't in the spring meeting, but previously when this had come up, it had been quicker to tell the people just to flow right through that protocol, get to that DLS, give that instruction, rather than pausing, deviating, and coming up with our own get out of the house phrasing. So is this a new change that we are pausing and giving that safety instruction?
Nope, it's not new. It's been around as long as EFD and EMD has been around, that you will pause and give that safety information. Now, some dispatch centers will tell their staff that they do want them to take the flow of the protocol. The problem with that is a lot of times what do we miss on a structure fire? We miss the echo fast track. And because call takers or dispatchers often don't utilize the echo fast track and they take the longer way through protocol, we don't get to that instruction for a while. And sometimes, depending upon the dynamics of the call, that instruction could be a minute in, and that's a whole full minute. So every situation is different, and there's no way to say that definitively every situation like this is going to be the same. The point is that whether the call taker does or does not provide that instruction out of the sequence should be something that your quality assurance unit sets the expectation for through feedback. This is our expectation for the caller is already in a house that's filling with smoke. We want to get them out, especially if you hear them coughing or you hear a lot of commotion in the background, right? Pause, give them that, right? That's basically it's coming back to what the very first thing that we teach in any protocol course, which is caller in imminent danger, right? Here's a situation where most structure fires, you're not going to have that situation. People are going to be getting out of the house, or they're telling you they're leaving. This one's a little bit different. So I would say, no, it's not new. It's been around, but it's a controversial one because, like you're saying, well, just take it, you'll get the DLS link shortly. Yes and no, right? So it comes down to, how do you support the dispatcher's decision to do or not to do that particular thing? And think about the other example of the seizure, right? I mean, that could be 60 seconds or more out before you get to those seizure instructions. So that's my response to that. Is it really is about understanding why they made a decision and being able to either support that decision or say, next time, did you know you could pause or suspend under Universal Standard 21, provide an instruction that's equivalent to reminder, right? I've already told them to get out and stay out, and now I'm reiterating that instruction. I just want to remind you, stay out of the building, make sure the door is closed, don't go back into the building for any reason type thing, right? That's what we're talking about. Does that help?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Ryan, just so you know, I think the hotel Wi-Fi is getting the best of you. You've buffered a few times.
Yep, sorry, nothing
Just
I can
letting you
do
know
about that.
Just letting
Okay.
you know.
All right, Monique's on our leaderboard with 631 points, followed by Laura and Goat. All right. So let's take a look. This is quick review of some of the concepts I cherry picked from the spring session about what our mission is, right? One of the things that we looked at was our old friend, awaken breathing. And we talked a lot about these two questions in particular because even many cues are marking things inaccurately in Aqua. And here are some examples of deviations to awake, right? She's awake, yes, and he's awake, conscious. He's responding to you, right? Those are examples of leading statements or incorrectly asking the is he awake or is she awake question, right? We would not want to mark those as given correctly if they fell into one of those situations. Similarly on the breathing, right? And she's breathing, he's awake and breathing. Well, we know we never combine them, right? And do you know if they're breathing, yes or no? We're giving a leading question to that caller and we're looking for them to validate what we're sort of guessing is the answer. And we don't want to do that. Certainly, we know awake and breathing are sort of the two most important things that we're going to ask during case entry, because that's going to establish early DLS, early dispatch, early echo. All of that stuff gets established from those two questions. So we always want to make sure that we're not only are we asking them correctly, but are we recording them correctly? And that's actually the bigger lift right now globally, is compliance to recording of these questions, specifically the breathing question, needs a lot of improvement. And you can probably assume where we're going with this is going to be on the uncertain versus the ineffective or agonal breathing, right? So let's just briefly re-examine this. We know that we can identify a life threat through case entry, right? Either through case entry 6, which is he breathing, or the echo fast track. But second, we also are seeking to know about the quality of the breathing, right? So when I ask, is he breathing? Oftentimes the callers say yes or no, which is great. We love those answers, but think about how many times the caller says something other than yes or no, like barely, a little bit, I guess so, I'm not sure, right? All of those are not yes or no. There's something else. And it's our job as cues to look at what the dispatcher put into the software and make an assessment of how accurately did they record that particular answer, right? So think about it this way. The breathing question is always a two-step tandem process. On the first step, we are looking to do a quick survey. All we're looking for is, do we have an immediate life threat or not? Because if I don't, I want to let key questions do its job. So the right-hand side of the screen, These are examples of questions about the quality of the breathing that are automatically built into key questions. I've established that the patient is breathing if I'm actually going to be seeing these key questions, but now I'm specifically saying, is the breathing normal, or is there difficulty speaking between breaths if it's on the breathing problem? That essentially takes a Charlie and kicks it up to a delta, right? So we want to make sure that we're providing feedback that's accurate and timely on awakened breathing every time, because we don't want to undercode any of these particular cases. Some of you have realized now, if you're on one of the latest builds of Medical Pro QA, we have a new fast track, a first party extreme respiratory distress fast track, which gets you a 6 echo 1 and puts you right into key questions without having to go through 3 or 4 of them before you get that recommended send point, right? So again, if you're not on those latest versions, speak with your IT, get with your command or leadership and talk about updating your software. Note that there are some response configuration changes that have to go into CAD first, but all of that's available when they go to download the conversion information for how to update the software on the website that your IT goes to get all that stuff. So, but anyway, right, we're just looking to identify a life threat. If we don't have one, then key questions will do its job downstream, right? And so here's 2 examples of where an answer to this question turns a Charlie into a delta. On the left-hand side, if I say no, he does not have difficulty speaking between breaths, well, I'm going to get a Charlie out of that, a 6 Charlie 1. But if I do say that he has difficulty speaking between breaths, that Charlie is now going to go to a delta. Now, many of you, there's no difference between a Charlie or a delta in what you're sending to it. And I've noticed that in working with a lot of the main agencies. In other parts of the country, that's a huge difference between a Charlie and a delta and what's going to go to that. And so we always have to be mindful that the code is important to accurately prioritize and predict the acuity level of that particular patient and what resources should be going to that. Right. If I even said, and a lot of people don't realize this is in here, does he have difficulty speaking between breaths? And they say, well, he doesn't, he's nonverbal. Well, we have a question for that. We have a follow-up clarifier that's built in, which is, does he appear to be struggling to breathe? Right. So we would only ever see that question if the patient was nonverbal. So we do want to let protocol do its job, but we also do want to make sure that we're able to identify and distinguish between a life threat or not. So quiz question 9 today. The emergency dispatcher asks, do you know if the fire is spreading? This is reviewed as what? And this sort of got out of sequence for me, but that's all right. Let's handle it now. Seven out of 8 have answered. Looking for the one last person. All right, so 4 said it was asked incorrectly, and that is the correct answer. Anytime we say, do you know or can you tell me, it is an asked incorrectly question. Think about this in the context of the breathing question. Do you know if he's breathing? And the caller says no. Okay, I might interpret that as being no, he doesn't know, when in fact the caller may have meant to imply that no, he's not breathing. And so we get down this really slippery slope of a no answer is ambiguous. And I don't know if that means they don't know or the answer is no. And what's worse, I don't clarify it. And now I put the wrong information into ProQA. I get the wrong send point at the wrong time. I'm not getting the right instructions for this particular patient, etc. So the do you know and can you tell me and those types of enhancements to questions are not as scripted. They do change the intent or meaning. Not as scripted means I change the wording, but I don't change the intent or meaning. Do you know if the fire is spreading is a completely different question than is the fire spreading, right? Because the do you know is what the caller is answering, not the actual substance of that question. So we want to make sure that we're providing really solid feedback on that, because I see a lot of agencies right now. In fact, one that was just about ready to go for ACE, and they thought that their stats were within ACE range. And when we started to re-review their cases, This was a huge thing on almost every key question. These dispatchers were saying, do you know and can you tell me? Instead of enhancing the protocol by saying to a third party, I understand you're not there, Mr. Smith. I do need to get important information for the responders. Just answer as best you can, right? Which is always a permissible enhancement to protocol, acknowledging that third party exists. And that way I don't feel the need to enhance every single key question with do you know or can you tell me, because it makes it more palatable. Just acknowledge that you understand they're not there and then move on, right? That's an enhancement to your key question suite, and it really helps dispatchers not have to change the wording. So if you give them that ability to use something like that enhancement, you're going to see a huge drop in the do you know and can you tell me before or after a particular key question. All right, Monique is in the lead. So we do want to eliminate these, the can you tell me, do you know? We call these prepper statements. And here are 2 examples of those prepper statements. We went through a lot more of this in March, so you can review that recording, but I understand you have limited information. I need to try to get as much as possible. Just answer as best you can. I get that you're not there. I need to try to get some quick info for the responders. It's okay if you don't know. Those are fine, right? You can give your staff examples of enhancements that you recommend, and you can change the wording however you want, or you can just kind of let them pick and choose what they're going to say, so long as it's not something that's a true freelance. All right, we are going to segue into cardiac arrest, but before we do that, let's see if there's anything in the chat or any other feedback or questions today.
Nothing showing, Ryan.
All righty, so every single one of these, at least that I will be doing, I will always talk about cardiac arrest because it's obviously an extremely part of what we do on the EMD side, right? So cardiac arrest and structure fire, they do tend to get a lot of attention on these, and rightfully so, because they're critical situations in protocol. So let's start this off with a question. Patient is reported not awake. When asked about breathing, the caller says barely. Which is the correct answer? All right, 7 out of 7 said that is ineffective breathing. Absolutely, every day of the week. No need to even expand on it. Let's see who's on our leaderboard. Still got Monique, Laura, and Goat in first, second, and third. Right, so when we're mentoring our dispatchers, we want to take them in and we want to show them where they find those terms for ineffective breathing or reasonable equivalence, as often can be the case, to remind them, hey, when the caller says this gives you an opportunity to either use a fast track at case entry or to at least recognize ineffective breathing at case entry 6 and get that early echo at the bottom of case entry. Both of those would be big wins. A little bit of this is kind of going back to the basics of what we teach in EMD, right? That breathing is a spectrum, like a lot of things in life are a spectrum, right? And so on the left side of our spectrum is normal breathing, everyday breathing that most of us on this call are at the first level. And then on the right of the screen, all the way to the right, we have somebody who's not breathing. So I just drew a big purple box around 5, 6, and 7 because I wanted to introduce the next bunch of topics by saying that our best chance of survival for out-of-hospital cardiac arrest is when we identify ineffective breathing. It's not when it's not breathing, right? But oftentimes it's too late. When a person is reported to be not breathing, 0 respirations, we are going to do CPR in most cases. We're going to go through the motions. Our success rate is going to be very small. The best chance is when we can actually identify phrases from the caller. So if the patient is unconscious plus barely breathing or can't breathe at all or fighting for air, one of those types of phrases, that's the best opportunity for us to impact their outcome, is at a level 5. At a level 6, where they're making irregular in cardiac arrest. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to identify this ineffective breathing as early as case entry, even as early as case entry 3 on tell me exactly what happened, so that we can get that early echo and get early hands on chest for that particular patient. If we wait till number 7 and there's absence of breathing, yeah, we're not really doing much for the patient. And the reason why I put this on the screen is to say that a lot of dispatchers globally, and I work with agencies all over the world, they all struggle with the same thing. And that is to say, they're not convinced that something is a cardiac arrest because they're looking for something that's definitive, right? We love to have absolutes in protocol. Every time this happens, we do that, right? It's just comfort in human nature. But if we're waiting for zero breathing, we're not doing the best job for our patient. So that presents us with a challenge, which is early identification of ineffective anagonal breathing and early positioning of the patient, which is half the battle of CPR, is getting them flat on their back on the floor with nothing under their head, right? Think about how many times you've taken those calls or reviewed those calls where you're thinking, what is the dispatcher doing? Just get them positioned, right? We're not necessarily saying that that's going to be a hands-on chest call. We just want to get them positioned. So right, so when I look at C2, position the patient, all I'm doing is getting the patient down onto the floor, flat on their back with nothing under their head, right? I want to be absolutely certain that I'm giving C2 because that's half of the battle. If they're unable to move the patient, I have a clear way of being able to give them instructions on how to move the patient, right? So many of you already know we have bed and we have chair, and we have 2 ways for each instruction, a primary way and a secondary way. If it's been a while since you've looked at the unable to move patient pathway in ProQA, I highly recommend that you take a look at it. And then after you've given the primary instruction and the question comes up, is the patient on the floor yet? Say no, and see how the instruction gets modified. It's one of those things in protocol that a lot of people don't realize is actually there. There's always a primary and a second way to move the patient, right? And so we want to get them on the floor. We want to get them into what we call the pre-CPR sequence. So the screen on the left, C2, is the one where we see people get the most stuck on. They look at this instruction and they say, oh my goodness, this is going to take me into CPR, and I'm not convinced it's a cardiac arrest. And my response to that, and your response to that should be, who cares? The cursor priority lands on not breathing /agonal /uncertain. You don't have to accept cursor priority. Cursor priority is there primarily for those CADs that don't have a mouse. You can move the cursor priority or that green arrow with your arrow key on your keyboard. Try it next time that you're on shift. You will see you can move that green arrow. The green arrow does not mean click here. It means I think you might want to be here, but I'm not 100% sure that you do, right? We always have that critical thinking element that we have to put back into protocol. So look where my green arrow is on my slide. My green arrow with the number 1 on it is on the breathing button, right? So as soon as I get the patient positioned for CPR and I've given that instruction, a lot of times the caller is going to say, oh, he's breathing now, right? And that's great, but we don't take their word for it. So I would click on breathing, and what's going to happen is you're going to go to C3 and do a mandatory breathing check, right? We're going to tell them how to tilt the head back, and we're going to get them to look or hear for any breathing. And even then, we're not taking them at face value. Let's say they say, oh yeah, he's breathing. I feel the air coming out. We click on the yes DLS link at the bottom of the screen, and then we get to C17, which is a breathing evaluation, and we let the breathing diagnostic tool or breathing verification tool do its job of determining whether or not that breathing is effective. right? And so many of you have seen the new scripting on this. We actually went over it in March. It had just come out. We've got rid of the whole, I want you to say now every single time she takes a breath in, starting immediately. And now we have something that works a lot better, which is okay. We're going to check his breathing together to make sure it's all right. When I say go, watch him closely and tell me each time his chest rises, are you ready? Go. And then we time the ventilations, which means that we're having to redo that tool a lot less often because they're getting it on the first time, and we're preparing them for the instruction before we barrel into it. And then they stop saying now because they didn't know what we really wanted them to do. So I put this up here to say, when we give feedback on cardiac arrest, even if it's not related to an actual case, it's a great time to review. Get the patient positioned. Don't be in so much doubt about the breathing. It doesn't really matter. And we can do CPR on a patient, and I've done it many times in my career where I'm thinking to myself, I don't think the dude needs CPR, but protocol is protocol and it's telling me to do it. Okay. I didn't hurt any patients and probably ended up impacting patient care positively in those cases, right? So we don't want to be in fear so much of doing CPR. We also don't want to be in doubt so much, but that happens. But let protocol do its job. Go through the check breathing. At the end of the day, if I go from C2 to C3 to C17 and the patient is determined to be breathing normally, do you know where it dumps me out? It dumps me out on maintain and monitor. And that's where I can camp out until responders get there or the patient's condition decompensates, and now I do have to go back and do hands on chest. So for any feedback on that one as well. Anything in the chat?
Nothing showing, Ryan.
Okay, a little bit of feedback from you all. What are some caller barriers to hands on chest? What are things that you have heard or had in your own experience where the callers end up not getting hands on chest? What is the event that happens that causes them not to do CPR? We got some really good ones on here. All right, so 7 out of 7 responded to this. That's great. I really like these ones. Not wanting to admit their loved one isn't breathing. That's a big one that we don't talk a lot about. I'm so glad somebody put that up on there. That's my experience as well. They're sort of in denial, right, about what they're actually witnessing. And then we sort of get swayed by that denial in a lot of those cases. I have a bad back. Yeah, I certainly hear that one. Not wanting to touch the patient, that's also a big one, especially if it's somebody they don't know. Patient can't be moved. Yep. One thing I will say about that, because we have a couple on here that's talking about unable to access or move the patient. So as you know, we have bed and chair as standard links for if they're there. One of the things that we are going to be getting in the near future is a wedged link where if the patient's wedged between the toilet and the wall, we'll have an instruction on how to get them out, and also face down, because that's something that we actually hear a lot in calls where we have to tell them how to log roll the patient. Well, we don't actually have an instruction for that yet. And so remember that if we can support what the dispatcher did in telling the caller how to get them face up, then provided it's not something completely crazy, I think we should give them credit, right? That they thought outside the box. That I don't have a link for face down currently, so I just told them to roll them over and it worked, right? So we always want to support that critical thinking and sort of outside the box stuff. He's breathing a little. Yeah, that's a really big one, right? Is callers are like, yeah, but I'm not going to do CPR. He's sort of kind of breathing. Well, it's our job to let them know that the breathing they're describing to us is not effective. And some of the best callers that I've heard, or call takers, they'll let the caller know, sir, I understand that you're saying he's breathing a little, but what you're describing to me is not effective breathing. So CPR is still necessary. And they explain it like that. And I have to tell you, a lot of callers will actually be like, all right, they'll listen to that voice of authority, provided that we give them the explanation that makes sense to them. They might even say, what the test that we just did on their breathing is telling me that he's not breathing enough. So we're gonna do CPR on him. And in most situations, that's enough as well. Small spaces, yeah. That's always a big concern as well. So great answers to that one. And now I have a follow-up to this one about caller barriers. This one, I would like to definitely see what the responses are. What are some dispatcher barriers to hands on chest? Meaning it's the dispatcher that doesn't get to hands on chest, not the caller. We got some really good responses in here. Petrified of CPR. This is a very real phenomenon. Quick plug for something that's on the Academy website. We now have a telephone CPR course that all Academy certified dispatchers are eligible to take. So if you haven't been in the online college in a while and you don't know about that, log into the online college and check out the course that's being offered for telephone CPR. We talk a lot about some of the barriers in there, and it's great information for every experience level on CPR. But yeah, being petrified of CPR, very, very real situation. And I think part of the reason is because we feel that we're going to hurt somebody if we start CPR and they don't need it. And that's just sort of that old wives' tale that we've been dealing with for a long time. I remember my first CPR class in 1994, they told us basically if you did CPR on somebody that didn't need it, you could crack a rib and pierce their heart and all of this other stuff. And it turns out it was really just junk science, right? And back then we had to have zero breathing to do CPR. There was no ineffective or agonal breathing taught in courses like American Red Cross CPR courses. And now, of course, the science is firmly behind doing CPR, even when we're in doubt, sort of that no-go philosophy. So failing to recognize the signs, I'm assuming, yep, very, very important. New, right? You might have a newer dispatcher who doesn't really know what's going on. I like missing key phrases. That one's really important as well, especially with regard to ineffective breathing. The terms that callers will use, like he's breathing, but it's really funny, right? And we should immediately recognize, like, okay, that's not normal. Also, think about going back to case entry 3. Tell me exactly what happened. How many of you or your dispatchers, if you were told that a patient was collapsed on the floor, would be curious to clarify that situation? Because collapsed is a loaded phrase. It's a word that has a lot of meaning. That doesn't mean fall to most people. That's a specific medical event. That's like the big one, so to speak. We'll talk about clarification in a little bit, but that's an important one there, the word collapse. Doubting CPR is needed. Yep. That's probably the biggest one on the list, is sort of that doubt. And remembering we're in the non-visual environment. I can't prove or disprove that somebody's in arrest necessarily on the phone. Sometimes it's even hard for trained responders. Think about how many times you've had first responders like police officers get on the scene of an overdose arrest or something similar, and they can't figure it out, and they're with the patient and have eyes on the patient and hands on the patient. So for us, being on the phone and with questionable information from the caller definitely makes us in the more challenging environment. Tunnel vision, yep, certainly can be an issue. Playing into the caller's emotions, that's a really good one too. Yeah, I see that a lot. Hesitation, wrong protocol selection. Yeah, these are all really good, important reasons why a dispatcher would have barriers. Quick plug for ProQA reports. If if your agency is not routinely pulling a hands-on chest report from ProQA reports, you want to start pulling that at least quarterly and sharing that information with your dispatchers to show them how good are we at getting hands-on chest, right? It's not an ACO report, it's in ProQA reports. Some people don't even know ProQA reports exists. Ask your IT where it is and to get you access to it as a queue. You're going to find a lot of really interesting information in some of those reports about CPR and hands-on chest and other things like that. So I have this slide. This is one that I used in March. It's one of the few that I elected to put back in for this particular presentation. Was in the center of the slide, and I know I spelled opportunities incorrectly. I've got this guy laying on the ground and he's missing his heart, right? Because he's in cardiac arrest. On the left side, I've got the barriers for the caller. I'm not sure, I can't, I won't, I don't wanna. But then on the right-hand side, it's the same exact thing for many of our call takers and dispatchers. I'm not sure it's a cardiac arrest. I can't use protocol in the right way. I won't do it, or I don't want to because I'm not sure of myself. So at the end of the day, some of the core reasons why we don't get hands-on chest on suspected workable arrests are the same reasons for callers as they are for the dispatcher. And then you add in the fact that we can't see through the phone, and that just compounds it. So now that we know that we have a lot of these barriers, right, we have to figure out what we can do about them. And so I use an inverted pyramid. This is not something from the academy. It's something that I've just come up with over the years of looking at these arrests, a ton of them. One of my many roles with quality performance review is I review a lot of high risk cases where there were bad outcomes. So I review a lot more cardiac arrest than most queues. And I started to see trends a few years ago into what was happening, right? And so when we have a reluctant caller who doesn't want to do CPR for any number of reasons, there are different levels of that reluctance. So on the top of the pyramid, and our best chance of getting them to do hands-on chest is when they're just uncertain. And how that manifests is, I don't know that this is the right thing, or I don't know that he really needs it. That's the opportunity for the dispatcher to jump in and address that issue and say, I understand you're a little bit apprehensive, but let me explain what we're going to do, or let me tell you why this is necessary, because what you're describing to me in his breathing means blah, 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 right? So we go through that. Then at the second level, we have just resistance, where the caller gives a reason other than just general reluctance, like I'm worried about hurting him, or I can't do it by myself, right? Those are resistance, but we can still have a good chance of overcoming that resistance by acknowledging their concern and giving them an alternative. Like, I'm going to walk you through it. Is there anybody else there with you who can help you? I don't want you to worry about hurting him. Right? We see that a lot with moving the patient from the bed or chair to the floor. Oh, I don't want to do that. I'm going to hurt him. And then we have to say, don't worry about hurting him. It's more important that we get him on the floor and potentially save his life than we are causing an injury from the fall, right? But callers will worry about that, and they don't necessarily appreciate the gravity of the situation. And then when we get into that purple area of refusing, there's a low chance of us converting that into a cardiac arrest hands-on chest case, right? No, I won't do it. Their mind is made up that they don't want to do it. We sort of lose control at this point as a dispatcher, because once they get to this point, it's really hard to persuade them. And then finally, the no chance is the caller hangs up or passes the phone to somebody else and we start over, or that particular person is physically unable to do it, or they're not with the patient or something like that. I call that bye, right? Bye, no chance of really helping that patient over the phone. And so if we're aware of these situations on my sort of inverted pyramid, I think it sort of puts into perspective that we have an opportunity in at least the first and second level to really impact. And often that's going to be in a non-scripted way. And that's why we're talking about this today. Is we love when things are scripted, because I'm just going to read these things and I'm going to do the right thing. But I keep saying life doesn't happen to a script. It's like childbirth. Many of you have taken childbirth calls where, yeah, the script goes from A to Z, but oftentimes the baby has different plans, and then we have to use the target tool or re-navigate in the pathways. Cardiac arrest can be a lot like that too, right? So a lot of these barriers, we need to have a response to it. And this is one of those things that I always want to review. If the caller gives the barrier on the left-hand side, here's something that's recommended on the right-hand side that a reasonable call taker would respond to the caller, right? Like, I can't do it. Yes, you can. Listen to my instructions. I'm going to walk you through this together. Let them know it's a joint effort, that you're there to help him. When they say he's kind of breathing, again, we want to recognize and let the caller know what you're describing to me, or what the test that we just did shows, is that it's not effective breathing, right? You're not going to see that in a script in DLS. That's an enhancement to the protocol, which maintains the integrity of the protocol by getting the caller to perform the requested instruction. I don't want to hurt him. We must act now. Don't worry about hurting him. It's more important that we get him down onto the floor than anything that might happen while we're getting him down onto the floor. Whatever's reasonable to say, right? How about I can't move them? Okay, use the unable to move the patient link and troubleshoot with the caller. One of my favorites, we're already doing CPR. How many of you are thinking to yourself, I won't put a quiz question up on this. Oh, you're already doing CPR? Okay, great. And then you'll hang up the phone, or you'll accept that at face value, right? How about jumping in and being proactive and saying, okay, put me on speaker and I'll help you count out loud so we make sure we're doing it right. And at the very minimum, you can use the compressions diagnostic and pace the caller 1, 2, 3. Three, right? So be proactive in those cases. That's an agency specific thing. Some agencies, it doesn't matter if their CPR is being reported to be in progress. They're still going to follow protocol and say, I understand. I'm going to make sure we're doing it right. And then they go through the protocol. That's the best practice, really, is we don't know what kind of CPR they're doing. That could be very low quality CPR. That could be CPR from the 1990s, where we had different compressions and breaths ratios and all of that stuff, especially if you're an agency doing compressions only CPR with no breaths on a medical arrest, right? We don't want to waste time trying to get breaths in that are not going to be effective anyway. And then a big one also, but I feel a pulse, right? Remember, we don't bother with a pulse check on a cardiac arrest. It's no longer part of our sequence for over a decade now. The only time we do a pulse check is on a conscious patient with a heart problem, right? So we can't go by that. It's unreliable. Oftentimes the caller is feeling their own pulse, or they're not able to get a pulse just because they don't know what they're doing. So that's why the pulse check is gone out of all of the lead organizations that provide CPR training for lay people. It's completely unreliable. So what are your effective phrases to motivate callers to do CPR? What do you do, or what do you hear your dispatchers doing that you think is effective in motivating callers? I understand you're scared. I'm here with you and we'll do this together. I like that one a lot. I'm going to help you. Awesome. I'm here with you and we can do this together. Good. Going to be right there with you and make sure we do it right. We want to take any opportunity to help them if we can. You got this. Yeah, I think those are all really good, effective phrases. We should be very wary about taking a refusal at face value without at least making an attempt to clarify why they don't want to do CPR or they're apprehensive about doing CPR. Now, for those dispatchers and queues that like everything to be scripted, we have examples of reassurance in the protocol. Nobody ever clicks on these buttons. We know that statistically because every time you click on something in ProQA, there's a record created that we can pull data out of later. And so C2 for position the patient, if you go to reassurance or extra reassurance, they are examples of things that you can encourage a caller to say during a CPR call, but you're not limited to those examples, right? You are free to come up with your own, so long as they're not harassing or threatening a caller, right? We certainly would not encourage that. But I think anything that's in the ballpark of the 4 items that you see on the extra reassurance tab is something that we want to promote. Some agencies come up with phrases that they recommend, and they put those phrases on a sticky note on the bottom of their monitor as next to those heart attack signs that are hidden, and that can sort of help. But most of these things are going to come up organically in the middle of a call. Here's some examples of unscripted enhancements from just a bunch of monitoring, and you may have heard some of these before, right? There's both functional and inspirational enhancements to protocol that you can make. One of the more functional ones that I wish was actually in protocol is put me on speaker, right? I can't tell you how many times that's helped me really get the caller to perform action and do high quality CPR. Roll them onto his back. Who else can help you? Drain the tub, turn the machine off, don't touch the gun. I know there's an AED at the customer service desk. Well, that's a really good one too. If you get a cardiac arrest in a store or a place of business or something like that, right? You might let them know where you know that AED is just from your own experience. Then there's some inspirational enhancements to protocol. You can do this. I'm going to tell you exactly what to do. Listen to my instructions. The only chance they have is for you to try, and we'll do this together, are sort of the inspirational. So sometimes there's a functional issue. And sometimes there's an inspirational issue. Sometimes you need both of those types of statements to let the caller know to get some high quality CPR, right? Depending on the situation. Question 11, on a workable arrest, the ED asks, do you want to do CPR? How should you review this as the cue? We got 5 out of 6 have answered. Right. 3 said it was a prohibited behavior. 1 said it was asked incorrectly. And another one said it's actually freelance. So actually the correct answer, and I have this wrong on the quiz, I apologize, is actually it is a prohibited behavior. Anytime that we ask the caller for permission to perform dispatch life support, that is going to fall cleanly under prohibited behavior under customer service, which is the only critical deviation under customer service. All of the other aspects of customer service are minor deviations, but prohibited behavior, we don't want to make the caller feel helpless. We don't want to ask their permission. Their call to 911 is implied consent. And while they have the right to ultimately refuse our instructions, when we ask permission, we give them a reason not to do the requested instruction, and that undermines the integrity of dispatch life support, which is assertiveness and providing life-saving care to the patient that's being called about. And so that's why it is considered to be a prohibited behavior, along with some other behaviors as well, which are rare in a call, but can definitely happen. That would be harassing a caller, demeaning the caller, using swear words, things like that. So it's of that level because we just don't want to ask permission. We give them we ask for permission, they're not going to do it, right? In the way that we phrase it, we're giving them an out. We don't want to give them an out. So the correct answer is prohibited behavior. I apologize that it was marked as the correct answer was asked incorrectly. That is not the case. So let's segue into feedback. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yeah.
Great, perfect. So quick refresher, remember what Q should not do. We don't grade, we don't score, and we don't ding. We review or we evaluate, we assess. We want to get out of the habit of using these words. They have very negative connotations. And so if you're one of those cues that tells your staff that you're going to ding them, you're basically creating problems with your quality assurance team, and you're not going to get good results when you sort of look at it that way. So just like protocol has specific words and scripts, we want to be just mindful of the language that we use. We're making evaluations and reviews and assessments. That's really all we want focus on. And remember that one-on-one feedback is the most important thing that we can do to improve performance. It's not additional case reviews that sit in Aqua and never see the light of the day. It's not emailing somebody once a month a couple of incident performance reports and that's your feedback. That's not effective. That's not going to change somebody's behavior. Every single implementation that I do follows the same exact track in terms of when an agency doesn't provide person-to-person feedback consistently, and it doesn't have to be every day or every week, but consistently, scores will stagnate and they'll stay that way because nobody's going to take the time to read your writing and be like, oh yeah, you know, have the dialogue, and the dialogue between you and your dispatcher is what's going to influence their behavior either way. So there's two types of feedback. There's active feedback and there's passive feedback. Passive feedback is by far what most queues do, and that's to basically give the supervisor some incident performance reports that they're going to then give out to their shift, or printing these out and putting them in somebody's mailbox, sending these by email, Power DMS, whatever tools that you're using for your feedback. But it definitely does not have the same impact as active feedback, which is meeting with somebody maybe once every 2 weeks or 3 weeks or even once a month and going over their performance reports and having that constructive dialogue back and forth about that case. You'd be surprised what types of questions they're going to ask and what type of feedback that they can give you, or maybe to explain why they chose a particular pathway in the protocol. And those to me would be wins if you can have that discussion, because that's somebody who's open to feedback and that's somebody who's willing to not only listen to what you say, but to sort of have some skin in the game too over the way that their calls get managed. So active feedback is definitely the way to go. We always want to share their performance measurement. We always want to tell them they're doing a good job when they're doing a good job. Our goal is to coach, to engage, to listen, to inform, to answer questions about protocol and standards, but really also to build and nurture those positive interactions, right? We want to have a good relationship as peers with all of our dispatchers so that they feel comfortable coming to us and saying, hey, Ryan, I took a call last night and this is what happened and I'm not sure I did the right thing. If you have dispatchers that do that routinely to you and come to you, that means they trust you. That means they trust your quality assurance judgment and your quality assurance team, because they're coming to you with questions either hypothetical or things that happened. And maybe some of it is a little bit self-serving. Oh, in case this call gets pulled into review, I wanted to tell you a little bit about why I did whatever. To me, that's still a win, right? And it's not necessarily a get out of jail free card, but it creates that trust and dialogue, which in my experience is extremely important for getting performance to be what you want it to be as a queue, right? So we always make a couple of philosophical assumptions about quality assurance. Dispatchers, call takers, they want to do well, but they also need coaching. They are all stakeholders, and all stakeholders want call takers to do well. The community is depending on us to follow protocol and to provide a good standard of service as we go through. So, what are some words or phrases from the floor that you overhear that negatively depict what we do in queue? I got some good ones up here. Don't queue that one. That used to be one of my lines as well. All right, protocols are too strict. We certainly hear that a lot. Oftentimes, when we look deeper into that, it's because of the quality assurance program. And it's because dispatchers are not given any latitude for enhancement, and they're not recommended to provide little prepper statements to callers that are outside of protocol. Certainly our performance standards allow for that, but if we're just following rigid protocol as it exists, then yeah, I could definitely see why somebody would say protocols are too strict. Mistakes being made. Yeah, I'm not sure if that's mistakes made in the in the review or just in general. But that along with ding, those are definitely things that we don't want to be promoting, but they're things that we definitely hear on the floor. So now that we know that these things exist, we can sort of wisen up and look at these and say, what can I do to sort of fix that? And that's not an overnight thing. That actually is going to take quite a bit of time. Remember that their perceptions of Q are that it's punitive, it's nitpicky, it's biased, and it's fault finding. And I totally understand all four of these things. Of those things on the list, the one thing that I actually would agree with is nitpicky. I will say every day of the week that Q is nitpicky, but it is nitpicky by design. And if we're explaining to dispatchers what the nitpickiness is and why it's there, then I think that sort of helps it along, right? I'm always surprised when I go into an agency to teach a class or to interact with their dispatchers. I'll ask them, do you know what the difference between a critical deviation and a minor deviation is in Q? And almost universally, nobody has a clue that there are subsets of deviations that Aqua assigns for given things. They just say, oh, it's either right or wrong. Well, no, right? Minor, moderate, major, and critical. If we're not informing our dispatchers of what these levels are and giving them examples of things that fall into, let's say, a critical bucket versus a minor bucket, we're missing a golden opportunity to let them know that Q is actually nitpicky but reasonable about it. If you have an inappropriate clarifier, that's a minor deviation. You need 30 minor deviations to make a call non-compliant if there are no other deviation types noted in your review. So compare that with a critical, which is a non-compliant right off the bat. It does actually seem reasonable, but if we're not explaining it that way and we're not giving those examples, then that shuts the process down. If your agency uses Q punitively, and some actually do, it's rare these days that I walk in and actually find that to be the case, you're also missing the boat on that. Q should not be punitive. It should not enter the disciplinary process. Certainly, there are exceptions to be made where you've met with somebody 5 or 6 times on a particular issue and they're still not playing ball and you've had dialogue. Well, then that's just, they don't want to, they're not going to do it. That may be something that leadership needs to take up, but it should never be the Q's role to punish or discipline based on a review. And biased, that one bothers me a lot, and I hear this a lot. Well, when so-and-so accused my call, they're harsh versus the other person who's more lenient and things like that. We hear that all the time. That's definitely bias. That can even be biased in terms of, well, they don't like me, so they go and they look for things on my call that you don't get marked for because they don't like me. They have it out for me. Every single agency has those dispatchers that feel that there is bias in there. And even if it's technically not so, creating that environment where that is said is troublesome, right? We'd never want to have that perception turn into reality. But for some people, that is, no matter how we explain it or how we justify it or how we show them the process of case review, they're always going to be in that camp. And that's unfortunate. But inroads can be made by sharing information and explaining and taking them through a case review. One of the most effective things you as a Q can do for somebody who's not on board with Q is actually take them through the mechanics of case review. Pick one of their calls and do it together and show them all of the steps that are involved and show them how the Aqua software computes the different deviation levels, etc. That can be an eye-opening experience for some of your dispatchers and really make them appreciate you more as a Q and have more respect for the quality assurance process. Perceptions versus reality is huge, right? To a call taker or dispatcher, you're either the Q police or the Q coach, right? Which would you rather be? I think most of us would rather be on the coaching side rather than the police side. But I hear this from time to time and it makes me grin or smile depending on my mood. Oh yeah, the Q cops got me again. And it's like, well, no, you got yourself and the Q just caught it. But maybe the environment that they work on, the Qs don't have a good relationship with the staff. And that's unfortunate, but it's never too late to repair a relationship that's poor. So do words matter? Well, of course words matter. Think about the negative connotations of some of our words on the screen. I'm doing audits. The only person I ever want to hear use the word audit is the IRS or an accountant, right? We're not auditing them. But think about things like grading and scoring. It makes people think about high school or grade school, and it's like, oh, it's either right or it's wrong. I'm a 60%er versus I'm a 90%er. Back when we used to have percentages, that was big. They're critiquing my call, right? When we say I'm going to critique your call or criticize your call or scrutinize your call, all of that leaves a really bad taste in people's mouths. So that's why I always try to use softer words: review, evaluate, measure, assess, benchmark. And it's not just because I want to be more PC. It's because those words really do have a meaning. And as Qs, we need to walk the talk. If we say Q is for performance enhancement and that I want to be your coach, I shouldn't be using those words on the left side. I should be very mindful of how I'm speaking and how I'm writing, because it's not necessarily how you say it. It's the meaning that they interpret from those words. Just like protocol has very specific words for things, we have to be super mindful of that. So what is the way that your agency gives feedback to dispatchers?
Brian, you're muted.
Well, then, I just said all that for nothing. Thank you for letting me know. So on this list, we've got a Can you still
Brian,
hear and see me?
you were kind of frozen there.
After on this list, you cut out the entire time. We got nothing.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes,
And do you see the screen?
Yes.
yes.
All right. So more about feedback. Couple of rules about feedback, right? It's always private as feasible, always objective and factual, friendly, meaningful, specific, documented, timely, and constructive. Let's talk about two of these. Timely. I understand that by the time you do a review, it can be several days since that call has been handled. And then by the time they get feedback, it might be several more days or even weeks after. Don't worry about that. Still take the time to give your feedback. And the other one that I want to be looking at is the constructive part. That's the dialogue part that you get to have with your dispatcher and say, hey, listen, here's what happened on the call. And here's a better way for next time, right? Especially if it's a low compliant or non-compliant call. Obviously, there's something in that call that had some risk associated with it, or it would be high compliant or compliant, right? And so we're not looking to beat the dispatcher up. We are looking to build them up and let them trust us that we want to help them. So on the constructive side, this kind of comes back to where we started when I said, take them into ProQA, reproduce the case, give them an alternative way that they could have handled that particular call, right? Show them where the AI is, additional information, show them how they could re-navigate that CPR call, show them how to use that tool that they might not have done correctly. That to me is the most important part of feedback. It's not reading them a report which they could read on their own or necessarily listening to the call, but taking them back into the actual software that they use every single day and showing them that pathway. And if you do that on a consistent enough basis and have the time to do that, you're going to have a lot of dispatchers who are going to really excel and high perform in the future. When we don't do that, we tend to stagnate, and the same mistakes that occur will keep happening because they haven't been shown that alternative way. So even if you're the queue and you're uncertain and you're like, I don't know what I would have done, take the time and go through ProQA in test case mode and figure out yourself what the way should have been and then show them, right? So you don't have to do that in live time necessarily, but you want to be certain that you're giving them solid information. All right, 5 reasons people don't want to give feedback. Afraid of confrontation, not confident in protocol or queue. Those are knowledge gaps. They have other priorities. They're not bought into protocol or queue, or they're not motivated, which is apathy in the job. We're seeing a lot of this year. COVID really pushed that over the edge for just people not being motivated. But the number one reason is actually going to be afraid of confrontation. Well, that person has a strong personality. I know that they're going to object to this review, or I know they're going to say this, or they're going to make me feel bad about it, right? That's a very real thing. I'm never going to minimize that. But at the end of the day, we have to each figure out on our tough personality dispatchers, what is the best way for me to educate and inspire them without causing that conflict, right? And I can't give you any answer to that right now. You have to come up with that answer based on you knowing your personalities on your shifts. But even somebody who's closed-minded can have a constructive feedback session if it's done right. Sometimes it just takes a while to figure out what that method is. And maybe it's not you giving the feedback. Maybe it's somebody else giving the feedback who has more of a rapport with that strong personality. There's a lot of work being done on that right now, looking at feedback methods and strong personalities specifically as to what's the best method for the different personality types. So in the meantime, just kind of figure out where your folks fall, right? And sort of getting into the end of our feedback session, there are a lot of words that we want to avoid. Like on the left-hand side, avoid the negatives. You didn't choose the correct chief complaint. You failed to shunt to protocol 10 when that pain question came up on sick person. You should have stayed on the line with that caller because they were not alert. Never tell a caller blah, blah, blah. Right, you get the point. All of those things are accusatory in nature. Anytime that you're communicating with somebody on any topic and you say you failed to, or you should have, or you didn't, the other person is almost universally going to internalize that, and it's going to create conflict because now you're basically telling them they suck. We don't want Q to be doing that, right? So we don't want people to feel that they're on the spot, that they're in the accused category. So we want to use neutrals. So for example, I might say something like, the key question about how many floors or stories was not asked. That's an objective statement. It's not accusatory, it's a fact. This question was not asked. I didn't say you didn't ask it. That's implied. Of course, I'm the dispatcher. I took the call, all right? It's a way of softening what you have to say and not putting people in that uncomfortable spot. Another good one to use is next time, right? Next time, choose of call because the patient needed pre-arrival instructions. Okay, that's a softer way of letting them know what happened and what your expectation is for next time. Similar to that is just watch out for, right? Just watch out for those freelance questions because they add unnecessary call processing time and can delay reaching a send point, right? You're explaining what happened, but you're not doing it using a you statement, which is going to be accusatory. right? So here are some of those other examples too. You skipped key question 1. You didn't give the PDI about the pets. You didn't shunt to protocol 69, right? Try to make it a little bit more not about the you pronoun. Key question 1 was not asked, the pets PDI was not read, and protocol 10 or 69 was not shunted to. It's factual, it's objective, it's neutral. You'll have better luck in your written feedback and your verbal feedback if you keep some of these concepts in mind. So what is a positive or encouraging word or phrase that you use in some of your written comments? Right, got some good ones already. I like this. I like that your phrasing worked well here. That really supports something that you think the call taker did well, and then they're likely to use that phrasing again. Like that. You're rocking this. We should try to remember to blah, blah, blah. And this was a tough call. Yeah, all really good examples. I like the we. I speak like that a lot too when I'm giving feedback, because it makes it seem like I'm on your side or I'm with you together in this situation, and it's taken a little bit like we're on the same team, and I think that's a really good thing to do. Also, like this was a tough call. All right, so there's the 3 U's of why someone won't perform, right? They're either unaware, they're unable, or ultimately they're unwilling. We can't do much about the unwilling, but we can do something about the first 2 U's, which is unaware and unable, right? So if you're not aware, I can make you aware by giving you feedback. If you're unable to do something, I can help you do it, right? So for example, I'm unable to get ProQA to load on this workstation. That's something that's fixable. I can give you the ability to do it. But if you're unwilling, well, that's a much bigger issue. So the unaware one is the one that queues run into the most. Oh, I didn't know I should go to chest pain for that. Or I didn't know that that's actually a smoke investigation, not a structure fire, right? Those are the types of dialogues that you want to have. So that brings us into strengths-based feedback. Now, we spent a lot of time on this in the March session, so I'm only going to give you 3 examples of strengths-based feedback for today. But this will be something that I always incorporate into every presentation. I call them the 3 T's. Tell me what I did well, tell me how I can improve the next time, and teach me how and why to do it better next time. That's it. It all comes down to these 3 T's. Let's look at some examples. Here's an example of a non-compliant call that had some strengths-based feedback. The caller was extremely calm while explaining what happened, and your tone of voice remained calm as well as you moved through the protocol. This is the best way to have the caller comply with your instructions to help the patient. Well done. Right, so here the cue is letting them know what the behavior was and why this behavior was good and what impact it had, right? It gave the caller a way to comply with the instructions. But there's more. In the future, be sure to follow through the sequence of ProQA without asking freelance questions. Why? This will ensure there are no delays in getting the responders going right away and providing patient treatment. You did select the Echo Fast Track eventually, which was excellent to start the process as needed. The caller had stated, quote, she thought she saw him take some breaths, which can stick in your head as you want to ensure the best care is being provided. When updated information is given on patient condition, be sure to follow the links and confirm the situation. This will only take a few seconds and would ensure the correct action is being taken. If the patient was quote unquote beyond help, the determinant would change to a 9 Bravo 1 A from a 9 Echo 1. So notwithstanding the use of the word you, which I'm not a fan of, as you know, although in this context it wasn't in a negative way, what this does is it lays out the rationale, right? And that's what dispatchers want to know. They always want to know why. Why should I have done something that way that you're telling me? Tell them what the impact is, right? This particular queue, I think, has done a good job of explaining what needed to have happened and why, right? Having that future forward feedback for the next call will mean that this dispatcher is likely to follow my advice on the next one, right? And it lets them know what impact it has on the caller and the patient. So I thought that that was just a good example of something that explains it pretty well. And that's a non-compliant call, right? We don't want to get down to the non-compliant category. And then when we get to comments, we beat up the dispatcher. This call was non-compliant because you didn't grab the Echo Fast Track at case entry 3. You didn't do this, you didn't do that. Like, that's going to shut your dispatcher down. And yet every single week I see cases come across my computer where I'm evaluating somebody else's queue work. And I'm like, ooh, why are we phrasing it this way, right? And sometimes it's just human nature that we tend to dwell on that. But what I'm saying is try to follow this method because it's proven to work and it will give you a better rapport with your dispatchers. Here's another example of a non-compliant call. You did a good job keeping a calm tone of voice and reassuring him throughout the call that help was getting started. This kept him calm and focused on your questions. You also did a good job continuing to has more questions of his location at the end of their, there's a typo there. All of this information will help assist the responders in reaching them sooner. Well done. So again, explaining why something needed to have been done by giving them the impact on the call or whatever it is. And then we have our future. In the future, ask the questions as written so the caller can directly answer the question being asked, right? An example of why with the reason. They are written in a way that simplify processing the call. This will also ensure that the information is gathered quickly to update the responders and address any potential safety concerns. Also, be sure to give all PDIs completely to ensure they know what to do if the situation changes and can remain safe while waiting. Action with a reason for the action and pointing out things that were done well, even on a non-compliant call. And think about it this way. This is the final comments section of the IPR. You've already marked all of the non-compliant stuff above. There's no need to rehash any of that in your final comments. This is what they're going to be left with. This is the last thing they're going to read. It's the first thing and the last thing that they reread. And then they look at the deviations in your comments up top. And that's where those should go. They should stay kind of bucketed in there. There's no rule about that, and you can do it the other way if you want. But I'm saying it's going to be more effective if you finish up always and focus on neutral or positive items moving forward as you make that final comments. And the last one also for a non-compliant call. This caller originally reported that her fire alarm was going off. You could hear the alarm in the background. This caller had a bit of an accent and was challenging to understand. During case entry, she described that the alarm was sounding due to a fire on the stove. You gave your best effort in attempts to clarify exactly what happened. Keep in mind that while it is appropriate to give vague information, all clarifiers must be phrased as complete and objective questions. For example, you stated the stove is on fire. Is that correct? This will help prompt the caller to clarify without leading them towards a specific response. It is also important to remember to ask a question as written and give the caller a chance to answer prior to offering clarification. In this call, you combined a lot of questions with clarifiers. That's accusatory. I don't like that, but this is scored as a question asked incorrectly. In the future, be sure to pause and briefly scan PDIs prior to delivery. This will help ensure that all possible and appropriate PDIs are correctly delivered. So while not a great example, it's on the right track of what we want to see. Explain what happened. What did I do well? What do I need to work on for next time and why, right? And that's always the in the future or on the next call. That type of language is super helpful for dispatchers to understand what your expectation is of them the next time they get a similar call. And this is a very common call type, a fire alarm, which actually turns into a smoke condition, or there was a fire of some sort, which is now out, right? That can also be the difference between 52 and 69 and all sorts of things. So it's a good opportunity to provide some decent feedback. Here's 5 good feedback starters that I always go to. And they're sort of like defaults, right? Next time there would be value in choosing protocol 69 instead of 52 because we knew that the alarm was accompanied by smoke and this gets you a faster response, blah, 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 right? Tell them why there would be value and give them a good reason. Or how about this one? An opportunity was missed to provide better customer service in terms of reassuring the caller that while you were on the phone, your partner was dispatching the fire department. Let's say that there was a customer service issue. I'm not going to beat them up over that issue, but I will tell them that they missed an opportunity to provide better service or something like that. Similarly, a better way next time is to blah, blah, blah. In the future, focus on following your chief complaint selection rules and blah, 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 right? So, and finally, a challenging caller like this is best managed by using repetitive persistence or explaining to them that help is going to be dispatched while you're getting information or whatever the case might be. So if you're not using things that are similar to this, and you don't have to use what I have on here, they're just examples that have worked for me, come up with your own and start using them and be more consistent. And I guarantee you that you're going to get a lot more positive feedback on the other side of that coin, even if it doesn't come directly back to you and someone else gives your feedback based on your work product. You'll hear a lot more positivity on that. 2 examples of rewritten feedback. The initial feedback said, you selected the wrong chief complaint. This should have been processed on chest pain. Let's rewrite that. Next time, utilizing chest pain will prompt more relevant questions and code the call with the best priority for this situation. Look at the difference between me writing the initial one versus the rewrite, right? And honestly, these are things that years ago I would have written it like that. You selected the wrong chief complaint, and I would have been like that. Nowadays, I've learned, nope, that's not going to get me any satisfaction. It's not going to help my system. So I've learned to have to think before and rewrite a lot before I release an IPR. And here's a second one. You failed to use the echo structure fire at case entry, and this delayed the fire department. Ouch, you're just telling them that they basically burned somebody's house down. How about this? Next time, using the echo fast track for structure fire will ensure the earliest possible dispatch point for responders. It's saying the same thing, but differently. I'm letting them know what the expectation is. And that's really what we're trying to do here. Whether it's a medical call, a fire call, whatever the case might be, let them know what that expectation is. I'm going to pause here for any feedback or questions.
Nothing in the chat, Ryan.
Quiet group today. All right. We're going to finish out today by talking about clarifying chief complaints. I mentioned at the outset that this is a top concern at the academy level, and for good reason, is that when we look at data from the thousands of MPDS and FPDS users out there in the universe, there's a lot of the same thing that we're seeing from place to place, no matter where it's at. Chief complaint is one of the top 3 where we need to do a better job as Qs and a better job of educating through initial certification and yearly in-service training on how to clarify a chief complaint. Because honestly, we don't teach this well at all. And I will definitely put myself out there as saying, I think the way that we go about it and how to properly clarify needs to spend a lot more time on it. But it's never too late. And through the quality assurance process, you have an opportunity to help your staff clarify your chief complaints. So let's talk about this. I am going to start off with a quiz question. And it is the last one of today. A caller blurts out that his boyfriend is unconscious on the floor. Which chief complaint? And this is all the information you have. Looking for one more answer. All right, so 7 out of 7. I don't know why it didn't update yet, but just give it a couple more seconds. All right, let's see what the survey said. All right, so 3 said unconscious, 3 said not enough info, and 1 said unknown problem. All right, this is about what I expected. So let's talk about this situation. Caller blurts out that his boyfriend is unconscious on the floor. Many of you are probably thinking, well, I'd sure like to know more than just that he's unconscious on the floor, right? Because I can go to 31 for this every day of the week. Absolutely, it would be correct if a call taker went to 31. They use the word unconscious. I have an unconscious protocol in there. I'm good to go, right? The other half of us are thinking, well, not necessarily. How do I know what caused that unconsciousness issue? I would like to know if there's a scene safety element, a trauma element, some other weird thing that's happening in this call. So I'm glad that 3 people said there's not enough info, because I agree. And with that being said, we do have a winner of today's quiz, which is Monique with 900 points. So great job to Monique, Goat, Laura, Santa, and Rael as well for participating in today's quiz. One of the things we have to get a little bit better at is asking ourselves as dispatchers and queues, does the caller statement tell me enough? Because most of the time the answer is no. And that's why we recommend using Tell Me Exactly What Happened to get the story behind the event, right? The story behind why or how something happened is often as important, if not more important, than the event itself. And the unconscious hypothetical that I posed to you is one of those situations, right? And so in any context, here the caller blurts out that their husband is unconscious. Do we have enough information? Does it tell me everything I want to know? Can I just go to 31 at face value, right? And which chief complaint would you use? Well, think about it. It depends. It's not enough for the dispatcher to navigate without knowing more about the situation, right? If he fell and became unconscious, well, that's a 17. If he got assaulted, that would be an assault. Is he diabetic? That would be diabetic. Did he drown? That's a 14. Did he get electrically shocked? That's a 15. Did he get trapped under a car? That's a 22. Did he overdose? It's not on your list, but that's a 23. All of those chief complaints have an unconscious code on them. But yet, if I go to 31, I may miss the bigger picture about the situation. And yep, I'll probably get into dispatch life support pretty quick on 31 if I need it. But I would sure like to know, especially in an overdose arrest situation, or especially in an assault, that where there are safety issues, that I might have to suspend protocol to deal with the suspect and vehicle information and stuff like that, that I really want to know. And so half of our chief complaints involve the word unconscious as a descriptor and a determinant. So we really want to get to the point where we're creating dispatchers that are more curious at the beginning of a call so that they get on the right pathway and get the right questions being asked. Remember our discussion, oh, I don't like protocol because the questions don't make any sense. And oftentimes it's because they're on the wrong chief complaint, or they're on a chief complaint that's not suited for the situation that happened. And it's not just unconscious. Sick person is significantly overused because the dispatcher accepts at face value this spontaneous caller statement that are not descriptive enough, right? Abdominal pain, stomach pain, eye problems, fainting, fall, chest pain, headache, bleeding. We all have separate chief complaints for these types of things. We want to go to that chief complaint because it best addresses the primary reason for that call. And the questions are geared towards the event and not just the outcome. And that's part of the issue, is we have to start getting curious about the event and not just the outcome. I can distill it down, and many of you take these calls where you say, tell me exactly what happened, and the caller says, well, she doesn't feel well. she's sick. What does that mean? Everybody who calls 911 for an ambulance or rescue is some kind of sick or injured. But if we're not getting curious about it and we're overutilizing sick person, as you're going to see, then 1 out of every 4 calls, like in the example on this agency on your screen, is sick person. But we're now over triaging sick person. The ideal range for sick person use is 11 to 13% of your call volume on medical should fall into that sick person category. The example on your screen is an agency where 24% of all of their medical calls to 911 end up on sick person. But yet when we go through these calls and queue these calls and look at the data, we're seeing all of the abdominal pains, the missing back pains, the chest pains, the injuries, falls, unresponsive babies. It's a number of things that it's like, oh my goodness, why are we using sick person for this? Well, we like sick person. We've got to get out of that. We have got to get to the place where we're like, we don't want to use sick person unless there's absolutely no better place to go, right? This is a report you can run in ProQA reports for your agency. Get access to ProQA reports, run a master dispatch analysis, and you will see what your percentage is of calls that fall into every chief complaint. We have reports for all sorts of things that a lot of agencies never utilize. And that's a shame because it can make you a higher performing agency if you drill down into your data and see where all of your calls are going, what priorities they end up, etc. Similar to that is the use of omegas, right? And some agencies, they never use omegas, and I don't know why. But an example of an omega, like a toothache or an infected wound or an object stuck, is a better way to categorize the call even within sick person, right? And approximately 3 to 5% of calls for an agency should actually be in the omega category. It's okay that you're sending resources to an omega, and if an omega is an alpha response for you or whatever, that's fine. There's lots of agencies though where an omega is a no response of an ambulance, right? And a lot of our larger agencies, especially, you call up and you have a toothache, you're not getting an ambulance. You might get a referral. You might get some alternative community paramedic within a time frame window to come to you, etc. But accuracy now sets us up for future improvements to our systems. And we're never going to get there if we don't get people to actually use the correct items in ProQA. So that's why I spent a little bit of time sort of going over this. This question here on sick person, right? We all know and love this particular question, but how many of you review calls where the dispatcher just defaults to no on this question or chooses something in that list that doesn't really make sense, right? They're just wanting to get the code on a sick person. But all of your omegas are listed in the additional information tab. If you scroll down, you'll see all of the omegas. It's better to be able to get to that next page and classify a call as an omega than to just, default to 26 alpha 1 sick person, no priority symptoms, right? We've all reviewed a ton of calls where that's the code that comes out. And it's like, yeah, but they said that they had pain in their left leg. Why didn't they choose other non-omega level pain as previously answered, which is a 26 alpha 8, right? That's what we want them to do, is to be more specific in there. But this, folks, the reason I'm showing this is because it all comes back to tell me exactly what happened. When we accept at face value that somebody doesn't feel well, she wants to go to the hospital. That's not enough information to really navigate well in the protocol, but yet a lot of us will take that at face value. So what we want to do is we want to clarify, and I'm going to introduce to you a technique that I've been teaching for a long time. That really helps get to the reason for the call, right? And in order for us to do that, we want to talk about, okay, tell me exactly what happened and sort of where this phrase comes from. We need to do a better job on that as well. So there is absolutely a direct relationship between not asking, tell me exactly what happened, and getting incomplete information, which can impact our navigation for better or worse, usually for worse. And often the reason is because the dispatcher either considered it to be spontaneously volunteered, or they guessed at the meaning of what the caller said, or they made an assumption about what they heard, right? And so if a caller calls up and you say, tell me exactly what happened, or they use a spontaneous utterance, oh, she needs an ambulance, she's in a lot of pain, and we make no clarification, yeah, I'm probably going to end up on sick person, generic pain. And then when I drill down into it, I'm probably going to learn something about chest pain or abdominal pain. And do I shunt or don't I shunt, right? And so that's the crux of Q, is we have to sort of make those assessments on what they did. So one of the most powerful tools in our toolbox is this phrase of "tell me exactly what happened," which has been designed by linguists at the Academy to be very precise and to cut to the chase. So if you've never seen this explanation before, this is the explanation as to what every single one of those words means and why it's in the phrase, right? So let's just quickly go through this. The okay is a conversational shift from the location and callback, and it signals to the caller that you're now segueing into something else. Think about how many times in a day you use the word okay as a transition. Well, it makes sense that we would use it in ProQA as well. Even if it's a police call, okay, tell me exactly what happened, gets you better information. It's that segue. The tell me part puts the dispatcher in an assertive posture. It psychologically cues the caller that you are in charge and you're maintaining control, right? And that's why you see a lot of things in protocol are scripted that way, is to tell me. The exactly part is modifying the what happened part, right? It is you want to cut to the chase. You want to not just know what happened, but exactly what happened. The word exactly is what gets you the detail, that richness of the description, so that you have a really good idea of what happened, right? And so putting this together as one phrase is very effective because it lets the caller know you mean business, and it gives them that sign that they need to open up and sort of give you that factual and objective information there. When we say things like, what's going on there, or what's the problem, or what's your emergency, how can I help you, that tends to get us opinion, perception, self-diagnosis, and long irrelevant stories. So tell me exactly what happened definitely helps in this regard. Now, with regard to the spontaneous utterances, right? These are quick emotional responses that lack a thorough explanation. I need an ambulance right away. My dad's unconscious. Okay, I know what the outcome is likely. He's unconscious, but I don't know how he became to be unconscious. And I should want to know how dad became unconscious. And so I'll have a lot of dispatchers say, well, they told me before I even had a chance, Ryan. I am never going to use tell me exactly what happened because she already said her dad was unconscious. Okay, but she didn't give you the story behind the event, which is extremely important for us. So what we would say is, that spontaneous utterance is helpful. Yes, it gets us. We know it's a medical call, but it's only half of the story. So because the context is missing, we still want to segue back in and clarify that chief complaint so that we know that this is a 31 versus a 4 versus a 27 versus a 9 versus a 23 versus a 17. You see where I'm going? All of those things can be examples of that. Here are some examples of short caller utterances that must always be clarified. Unconscious as the top of the list. Collapsed. What does that mean? Is that a fall? Is it a medical event? Sick, ill, doesn't feel well. Those are garbage answers. Generic pain, bleeding, injured, hurt, accident, crash, heart attack, stroke, fell, drunk, not acting right, and in crisis or psychiatric. Doesn't tell me a lot about the situation. We want that story. Let me pick on a couple of these here. Heart attack or stroke. Yes, we can, by rule, take at face value. If somebody uses the word stroke or heart attack, we can go to 10 or 20. And what they're describing to you isn't either of those situations, because callers and lay people notoriously do not know the difference between a heart attack and a stroke. So we say we should clarify that. The two others on the list that I wanted to look at are drunk, right? If your agency takes at face value that a patient is just drunk and you handle that on 26 or 23 without clarification, you might be right most of the time. But I'm telling you, you're going to have a bad outcome eventually. Because what if the patient is drunk plus? And what I mean by that is, okay, the main reason why they're calling is that he is intoxicated or she's intoxicated, but there's more to the story. If they got intoxicated and took a header and split their head open and the caller didn't tell us that, well, now we're going to sick person with something that shouldn't be. if they got wise with somebody and they got assaulted and they happen to be drunk, we're now biased by the fact that, oh, I heard the word drunk. And whether your agency is one that uses 23 or 26 and that big debate, which will never end, it doesn't matter. We're missing part of that story, and we're missing an opportunity to better categorize that call in that drunk plus category, right? And so falls, traumatic injuries, those are things that we could be missing, and we get biased simply by that word, drunk or intoxicated. And the last one on here, in crisis or psychiatric, two of my favorites. You know, a lot of times the caller might say somebody is not acting right at case entry, and we don't clarify that. And so we go to sick person because we know that altered level of consciousness and not alert are part of key question 1 on sick person. But think about how many times where you get it deep into key questions or even the end of key questions, and then you discover, because the caller has now opened up to you a little bit more, that the reason is because they're diabetic or because they have a mental disorder of some sort, right? I would have liked to have known that earlier in the call, right? Because then I wouldn't have wasted all my time going through all these key questions, and now I have to shunt over to a different chief complaint to get better information. So those are some examples of things that must always be clarified. And there's ones for fire as well, right? Look at the list 1 through 12 of things that really should be clarified, because in and of itself, if the caller uses one of those words or phrases, it doesn't really tell us an awful lot about that situation or where to navigate. Specifically fire, burning, and trapped. Right? What does that mean? Trapped how? Car accident, factory, machine, right? We need to be curious about a lot of these particular things. So we want to be careful of vague, ambiguous, and insufficient caller statements. Here's an example of something that's vague. We need the ambulance because my wife is very sick. Okay. Might be sick person, but if we clarified, we might find out something different. Or how about something that has more than one meaning? My coworker just went unconscious. We beat that one to death. And something that's insufficient, there's an accident. What kind of accident? A vehicle accident, a sports accident, machinery accident, fall, right? We don't know because the caller hasn't provided the story behind the event. On the fire side, we have a bunch of them too. You know, we need the fire department to come check out our electrical box. Why? What's wrong with the electrical box? We don't have the story. How about this one? There's a blah, blah, ton of smoke and funny smell coming from outside. Okay, I don't know what that is. And finally, we've got a spill over here. What kind of spill? Is it a hazmat, a fuel spill, a service call, an accident, someone took a spill? Is it a medical call? I don't know what that means, right? So these are things that we have to clarify. But here are some examples of caller utterances, again, that don't tell us exactly what happened. The kid got hurt, grandma doesn't feel well, my coworker got burned, my Uncle Joe is unconscious and someone's injured. Let's talk about the technique that we're going to use. It's called acknowledge and then pivot, and it works very, very simply. You acknowledge what the caller has said, and then you pivot over to a clarification. Example, I understand she's injured. This is important. Tell me exactly what happened. How about this one? Tell me exactly what you see and hear. I understand you walked in and found her face down and not breathing. This is important. Tell me exactly what you see. Right? Why would I want to do that? Well, I'm looking to see if I can make this an obvious death at the beginning of the call in case entry, rather than to send out the cavalry and then have to retract it by reconfiguring the call. Right? It's a way of objectively clarifying the situation and getting the caller to open up without leading the caller. Here's another one that works. Tell me more. I understand he's shaking. This is important. Tell me more. Right? That might be a seizure. That could be a cold exposure. That could be a regular sick person. I don't know what that shaking means. So what we do is we acknowledge what they said, which was vague or ambiguous or insufficient, and we pivot over to our objective clarification. If you don't acknowledge what they said, they're going to be like, I just told you, you're not listening to me. So we always want to acknowledge the statement and then pivot over to our clarification. How about this one? What do you mean by? This is important. What do you mean by not acting right? I've let the caller know I'm looking for more information as to what they've told me, right? So that I can navigate better in my protocol. These are enhancements and clarifications. These are not freelance. They're simply enhancing the protocol to get better information from the caller. And they can be used at any point in the call, but the most logical place that we use them is actually going to be in case entry when we're at the beginning, the genesis of the call, to figure out what discipline and things like that. So here are some great examples of using acknowledge and pivot in action. I understand she's sick. This is important. Tell me exactly what happened. I understand there's been an accident. This is important. Tell me more. I heard you say he fell. This is important. Tell me more about that. I know you said your uncle is acting out. This is important. Tell me more about what you see and hear him doing now. I know you said you think she's having a heart attack. Please tell me exactly what's happening. And this is important. What do you mean by he's out of his mind? Right? All objective clarifications, but acknowledging in most cases what the caller has given you to introduce that clarification. This is going to help get to the right chief complaint, because one of the reasons why we don't get the right chief complaint is not because we don't know our chief complaint selection rules. It's actually because we don't know the full story behind the event and we take that spontaneous utterance at face value. On the fire side, we have these as well. I understand there's a lot of smoke. This is important. Tell me exactly what happened. I understand there's been an accident. This is important. Tell me more. I heard you say a gas leak. This is important. Tell me more about that. Think about how many times dispatchers confuse 59 and 60. Gas leak with fuel spill, right? Clarifying really helps at case entry to get to the right place initially. I know you said there's a funny odor. This is important. Tell me more about what you smell. Now, suppose the caller gives you that rotten eggs and our hypothetical comes full circle to where we started. I know how to go to protocol 60. I know you said a guy is trapped. Please tell me exactly what happened. I heard you say there's a spill. Tell me exactly what happened. And finally, I understand he has cancer. Please tell me the specific reason for the call today. And of course, that's a medical example, but it works well with those as well when they give you a disease or something that tends to produce an emotional response. We don't have a protocol for cancer. I need to know the reason for the call today, right? Another one that's not on this list is tell me more about what symptoms he's having. Let the caller open up and give you objective criteria, and you as the trained dispatcher will now take that and navigate in protocol based on the symptoms or signs that the caller has provided to you. Now, all that being said, sometimes the spontaneous answer to, okay, tell me exactly what happened is obvious. So here are examples where we actually don't need tell me exactly what happened. It doesn't hurt to use it, but caller gave you a spontaneous utterance that's solid. Quote, my mom is diabetic and she's acting strange. I think her sugar is low. I'm not clarifying that. That's sufficient for me. The guy next door is having a seizure on the sidewalk. I have a really good mental picture of that. I'm okay with that one. My grandpa fell from the bed to the floor while trying to get to the bathroom. That tells me a lot of information. I'm not going to clarify that. I'm going to go to 17 and vet it out in key questions. We just found the neighbor kid face up in the pool. I think he's drowned. Yeah, that one's pretty apparent that that's going to be a protocol 14. My husband is having very bad pains in his belly. Got her abdominal pain. And I hurt my back trying to load boxes into my car. That could definitely be a traumatic injury. Wouldn't be a back pain because there's a trauma event in there. Yeah, somebody might say that, oh, I would clarify the belly pain because what if there's a knife in there? Okay, you can clarify that. I understand he's having really bad pains in his belly. Tell me exactly what happened. Same thing with chest pain. Well, there could be a knife sticking out. We didn't ask. Okay, then use it. Right. So all of this is about being reasonable. What types of statements and clarifications and enhancements to protocol are reasonable for your agency, and therefore your QA unit should provide those expectations through feedback to your staff on what they can do and what types of things you feel would merit more of a clarification. So this isn't something that is like, oh, you must always do this. This is a tip and a trick and a method for getting better information on our medical and fire calls, a good explanation so that we're assured that we're navigating as best as possible. And there are fire examples that you can see on there. I'm not going to read them all to you, but like the first one, my next door neighbor's house is on fire. There's flames shooting up from the roof. I don't need tell me exactly what happened for something that clear. And gosh, I wish all callers gave us information like that at the beginning of the call. Then we would we would be much faster with protocol anyway. But that's not what callers do in the most part of things, right? Is they give us a little bit and we have to kind of extract it out of them, and that's our job. So that that pivot term and that use of tell me more, and I understand you said blah blah blah, tell me this, that's going to get you that story. That's also very, very important. Be careful of diagnostic terms, right? Callers misuse medical terms all the time, especially when it comes to heart attack and stroke. And then we have to realize we may have to re-navigate or shunt over to a better chief complaint. So we don't want to get biased by those callers. As a tip and a trick, I always tell dispatchers, clarify. You know, what do you mean by heart attack? Or I understand you think she's having a heart attack. What are his symptoms? Let the caller open up to you. And when they do that, you're going to be hearing some stuff like, wow, that's definitely not a chest pain. That's more of a stroke, or that's more of something else, because they don't know really what they're using a medical term incorrectly, as we mentioned. So also, let's put a rest to this. And for some of you, there's so much information out there on like the True to Q Facebook page, which I don't even go on anymore because there's so much bad information on there. But the Academy recognizes there is no difference between tell me exactly what's happening and tell me exactly what happened, right? Present tense or past tense, it's up to the dispatcher which version they want to use on there. We typically go with what happened, but if it seems like the caller is describing to you a situation that's happening, yeah, you can use what's happening. There's no issue with that. So our takeaways on this are verbalizing the okay, tell me exactly what happened, or clarifying something that's vague or ambiguous is important, and it will reduce freelances. It will get you better chief complaints. It will identify echo fast tracks better, and use that acknowledge and then pivot to get that clarification. I understand you're saying she doesn't feel well. This is important. Tell me more, or tell me exactly what symptoms she's having. Get that objective information. Now I've got more to work with, and I'm going to navigate much better into my chief complaints, much better into my post-dispatch instructions and my pre-arrival instructions if that case requires any pre-arrivals. So those are our takeaways with this. So the question then becomes, you know, how much reasonableness needs to go into this process? And I would say to you quite a bit, right? We want to encourage our call takers to get the story, but they have to do it in a way that's objective and non-leading. So we don't want to offer things to the caller. And sometimes agencies will start to use this process of clarifying, but then they over clarify by suggesting things to the caller. Like, for example, oh, I understand you said she doesn't feel well. What are her symptoms? And then they'll start suggesting things. Is it chest pain? Is it this? Is it abdominal pain? Does she have bleeding? Well, that's no good, because I've just led the caller down some categories that they might feel compelled they have to pick one of those items, and it's none of them, right? So give the caller ample time to give you that statement, do something with that statement, and navigate correctly. And last item on here, it's not on a slide, but one thing that I always mention is when the caller is giving you so many chief complaint or symptoms that you don't know where to go, or you could go to multiple chief complaints. Is giving you all of this. There is no issue with a dispatcher saying, Mrs. Smith, I don't mean to interrupt you, but this is important. Please tell me, what's the primary reason for you calling 911 today? Put it back on the caller to give you some objective symptoms that you can then say definitively that this is a sick person versus a non-sick person, and then choose your chief complaint that way. Or you could pick the one that has the highest priority on that list. If they're all equal in value, the dispatcher can choose any chief complaint that fits the bill. The goal is, let's reduce the use of sick person. Let's get better chief complaints out there in both of our disciplines. Let's get more accuracy in the key questions in the post-dispatch instructions. So that is full circle to where we sort of started today. And I would like to open up in our final minutes to any feedback or questions from the group.
Just a couple of things that we've jotted down, just going through Q over the course of the last couple months. Just a couple, I guess, like interpretation questions on key questions. Hopefully they're pretty easy to answer. But like going through the electrical hazard complaint or protocol, when it asks is water involved, we always get the, well, it's raining, especially with like trees on wires, wires down. Does that count as a yes answer?
Yes.
Okay.
And oftentimes the answer to that is obvious,
okay,
like in that
And-
hypothetical. Yeah.
perfect. And asking in contact with the electrical hazard, does people driving over it count?
No. But we
Okay.
could give credit if they choose yes. We want to make sure we're clarifying that.
Perfect. Let's see. We also had come up going through the allergy protocol. Does anyone have any medications to treat this? We get people fairly often who have a medication, but they don't have it on them. So is that a yes or no answer to that question?
It's yes, but you're going to have struggles when you actually go to give it if they don't have it, obviously. But it is a yes.
Okay. All right. And then I think the last one that we were just looking to clarify. So dispatcher not dispatching at the appropriate time. So they get a determinant code, but then just dive on into PDIs and don't actually dispatch the call right away. Is that something that we should be scoring, or should that be solely on counseling as an agency policy?
Yeah, it's going to be your local agency policy. The determinant code at the send point is always locally driven. So some agencies pre-alert, some agencies wait for the code, others do something in between. So as an agency, if your expectation is that they need to stop and dispatch units when they get to that send point or before that send point, you want to hold them accountable to that internally. It's identified through queue, but it's not something we actually mark in queue unless for you, it would fall under something like a minimum standard of practice. And I have seen that done with some agencies where the call taker and dispatcher are one and the same, and they do that. They actually don't stop at the send point to dispatch units. They go all the way through protocol and then dispatch units. Well, that might be a minimum standard of practice for that agency.
Okay, so it wouldn't be, so if it sounds like we'd more have like a policy in place if we wanted to do that. Minimum standards would be the place to do that.
Yeah, that's where I would do it. It could also be a protocol link technically because the send point pushing that is a protocol link. But it's more, to me, it's more like minimum standard practice because agencies really get to define that.
Okay, that's what I had it under, but I had some pushback from a dispatcher who said, well, show it to me in writing. And obviously we didn't have it in writing, so maybe that's where the policy side comes in, but okay. I think that's all the questions I had.
One thing I'll add, Laura, is on the electrical hazard chief complaint. I don't know what version you guys are on, but the version that came out this summer has major changes to the flow of electrical hazard. And so it works a lot better for some of those questions that you were just asking.
Okay. Yeah, we're on the newest one, but honestly, it's been a little bit since I've looked at it. These questions like I said, I've jotted down over the last couple of months, so.
Okay. Very good. Anyone else with questions or feedback? All right, I'm guessing none, and we are at the top of the hour. Thank you so much for spending your morning on this, and I hope some of this was helpful. You know, if there's additional feedback or questions, you can certainly get that over to me through Corey or Kyle if you don't have my email already.